Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. I am your host, John DeLynn, and we are so excited for part 3 of what I believe is another epic and really important Mormon Stories Podcast episode with Larissa and Jeff Kindred. And as this is part 3, I'll just give a quick recap of parts 1 and 2. Please pause, go watch and listen to those, and then come back. But we talked about Jeff and Larissa's Mormon upbringings in Utah. And Larissa's was particularly noteworthy in the Mormon Stories Library because she is of Japanese American descent. Her great-grandparents came here from Japan. And, we talked about growing up as a biracial Japanese American in Utah County in the past couple decades. But we talked about them finding each other, getting married. Jeff, of course, served a mission. Larissa followed the Mormon path in many ways. But, that was kind of part 1. And then part 2 has been about their marriage and specifically how they ultimately became progressive Mormons, Jeff going to med school, and Jeff and Larissa having fertility problems, and then adopting 3 biracial children who were black, and what that was like raising black children as a biracial couple in the Mormon Church, and what it led to was Larissa becoming more and more, both of them becoming more and more sympathetic to causes around race, but also one of the, again, really valuable parts of part 2 was Larissa talking about her feminist awakening, both before and after her marriage. And as Jeff also became sympathetic to many of these progressive social causes, he was in a bishopric for 7 years and then in a stake high council. So you see this couple in Tennessee becoming more and more socially progressive and religiously progressive. And we ended part 2 of yesterday's episode with them kind of teetering in their membership during COVID, trying to decide how they're going to remain Mormon and starting to feel like they still believed in the church-ish, but, were the Mormon people their people? As they experienced many Mormons around them opposing like the Black Lives Matter movement or expressing concern about calls for better social justice with African Americans and women and minorities. So today we're going to be covering several key themes. They end up talking about having an LGBTQ son. We're going to be talking about their faith journeys. We're going to be talking about Larissa's cancer diagnosis and how that affected them. But I think a major theme for today is going to be how, as a result of Larissa's cancer diagnosis and treatment, how that led to kind of a laser focus on what they've described as sexual dysfunction. We referred earlier to kind of masturbation kind of topics within Mormonism. We cover that in almost every Mormon episode because that's a part of almost everyone's Mormon journey. But we talked a little bit about guilt and shame and masturbation previously, and that, along with issues of marital sexual shame and sexual dysfunction, pornography use, and masturbation, are going to be front and center to today's episode. And so I guess we'll give a tiny bit of a content warning, which just is that we're going to be talking about sex and marriage. And so please monitor for yourself and for anyone who's watching or listening that's what we're going to be talking about today. So that's my opening disclaimer and introduction. Welcome back for day 2. Jeff and Larissa, thanks for joining us and for being willing to talk about something so sensitive, but so important.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Thank you.
We're glad to be here.
Yeah.
It's a good recap, by the way. That's good memory.
Okay. Well, my brain's foggy because it's the morning, but I just had some coffee. Margie will be joining us later as well. So we're looking forward to have Margie jump back in.
Yeah.
All right. So as we left it last time, you guys were wondering whether the Mormon people were your people.
Yes.
Not because you didn't love them or, value them, but just because you saw maybe some of their social positions not conforming with yours, but maybe not conforming with your understanding of Christianity. Right. I don't know. Where should we go?
We really loved our ward. So we, this is not individual people or it wasn't even like we don't connect with our ward or our state because we have I think we still have good relationships with those people. But yeah, it was kind of just generally, are these our people? And, the church always says that they don't have any political affiliation, but it doesn't feel like that. Sometimes it doesn't feel like there is a lot of space, maybe more so now, but it doesn't always feel like there's a lot of space for people with different beliefs that are not conservative. So yeah, I think that's where we were in 2020. 2020 is really feeling like, is this a space that feels like we're supported and understood in?
And then we hit the end of the year, and that's when we had the breast cancer diagnosis, which was a big catalyst in our progress.
Yeah.
Should we start there?
Yeah, let's start there.
Okay.
Yeah. So, it was the end of 2020, and just when you thought 2020 couldn't get any worse, we had this like huge blow. And so I was 39 at the time, so I was not having, routine mammograms yet. And I was just wrestling on the ground one day with my little boy who was, at the time, he was almost 8 years old. And so we were just like being rowdy and wrestling, and he just kind of elbowed me like really hard, like right in the boob. And I was just like, oh, ow, it just hurt so bad. And then it hurt for a few days after. And so I was just like kind of feeling it and like, ow, this hurts so bad. And while I was, feeling it, I was like, I think there's something in there. Like it feels like there's a lump or, something. And Jeff checked it and he was like, it might be like a hematoma, because he really kind of rallied me hard.
And we couldn't believe that we'd never felt it before. That was
because it was kind of substantial.
It was pretty substantial.
And so, so I made an appointment with my OB-GYN, and, she checked it and she was like, yeah, there's definitely something in there, but it's so, so unlikely that there would be a concern. I don't have a family history of breast cancer. And, so she said it's most likely a fibroadenoma, which is just kind of a fibrous tissue, is it like a kind of a cyst type thing?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's just a common breast lump to feel that's made up of just fibrous tissue, but it's not cancerous. So she said, just to be safe, we're just going to send you to get a mammogram, and then they're going to ultrasound it. And so, then I went to a radiology place, and they did my mammogram. And while I was there, they said, you may not know this, but you have very fibrous breast tissue. And that's because I have not ever been pregnant. So this is a little I don't know, anatomy lesson, but when women are pregnant and then they produce milk, their breast tissue gets fattier. And so they have less, it's the fibrous tissue that it can be more conducive to cancer. And so, so I didn't know that actually puts me at a slightly higher risk for breast cancer because I've never been pregnant before. So anyway, so she was like, oh, you do have very fibrous breast tissue, but you're 39. I'm in an age group that's very unlikely to have breast cancer. And so this whole time I was like, it's fine. And I feel like there's kind of a big to-do happening, and it's going to be fine, And so, so they did the mammogram, and then they ultrasounded it. And the doctor that ultrasounded it, he said, this whatever's in there is 4 centimeters. So it's about the size of a ping pong ball. So it was pretty substantial. And he said, we just have to biopsy this just to be safe. So then I waited a couple of weeks, and I went to have a biopsy on it, which is terrible. If anybody's had a biopsy, it's
it's just terrible. It's like such a terrible experience because you have to be awake for it. And it was just kind of.
And then she bled for, remember, like a day after.
Yeah. And then I kind of had this issue where it wouldn't stop bleeding. So I had this like huge, like bruise, like all over my side. And it was there for a little while. Anyways, so that was not very pleasant. And then, I waited a couple of weeks and, I was driving home from a school activity with my daughter. My 12-year-old daughter was in the car with me, one day and I got a phone call and it came through the Bluetooth on my car. And I saw that it was my OB-GYN's office. And I'm so glad I did this because my daughter's just sitting right next to me in the car. And I thought, like, I better not answer this through the Bluetooth, like I better pick this one up and put it to my ear. So it was my OB-GYN and she said, you have breast cancer. And it just was like, I felt like time stopped. I was just so shocked to hear that. And I've never had any health problems. I've never been hospitalized. I just am extremely healthy. And so it just was a total shock. And so then I was just like, okay. Like she was giving me some information. She said, like we'll talk tomorrow because it was in the evening. And then I just was trying to act normal because my daughter was in the car with me. And so I'm just like, it's fine, just keeping it in. And then I went home and told Hazel, go inside and then send Dad out. And so then Jeff came out to the car and I told him that I had breast cancer. And then I had like a full meltdown and probably like a panic attack. But anyways, so that's how this came about. So it was just out of the blue. It was just so wild. It was crazy.
And that's on top of a lot already. So that must have, I can't imagine.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it was crazy. So we kind of started, going through, you have a million appointments, and I have an oncologist and I also have a breast surgeon. And so we kind of started putting things together, to figure out what was the right treatment plan because it was large. And so it was invasive cancer. Like that means it had spread outside of the duct, which is where they normally, will form. But they didn't think that it had spread into my lymph nodes, which is good because the lymph nodes are what spread it to the rest of your body. So anyways, so we were just kind of waiting and kind of figuring out what the right treatment plan is. And it was just a really, really emotional time for me though, because I really felt like it changed, how I thought of myself because I thought like, oh, I'm young and I'm healthy and I'm vibrant. And I think after that, I started feeling like, no, I'm not. I'm sad. I'm a sad person with cancer. It kind of robs you of that feeling of like youthfulness so it was a really emotional time for me because I was like, I'm a person with cancer now. And so it's hard to not let this diagnosis define you because it really feels defining. So yeah.
Well, that could be its own episode. So, I'm so sorry. But so I guess it's one thing to receive a cancer diagnosis. It's another thing to receive it when you're in the middle of a faith crisis in a high demand religion.
Yeah.
And you're trying to, and your husband's in a high leadership calling after you just got released from the Relief Society presidency. Uh-huh. And you've got 3 small biracial adopted kids.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
It was a lot. Yeah.
So how did this play into kind of your Mormon journey as it was progressing?
So I think the interesting thing about it is that, and this is something that kind of makes me feel sad, but I think that this was maybe something that made me feel like I could really take up space and prioritize myself. And I think that this was kind of a turning point for me and how I approached just my life and who I was in the church because, I felt like I have cancer right now. And so everybody has to revolve around me right now. And I'd spent so much of my life feeling like I have to do everything for the kids and I got to do my calling perfect. And I've got to, be like Miss Perfect for Jeff. And so I kind of like got into this mode where I was like, no, it's about me right now. Everyone has to revolve around me right now. I have cancer, like this is about me right now. And I think that it's sad that it took having cancer to do this, but I think it really helped me to kind of find my voice. And, like people are asking me to do things or help with things. And I was just like, nope, I'm not doing that, and this is how we kind of like should be functioning anyways, but I had not been up to that point.
I just have to say this, just an observation. The word anti-Mormon gets bantied about a lot. Mm-hmm. I can't think of a more anti-Mormon thing, meaning going against the grain of Mormonism, than a woman, a mother in a home saying, number one, saying no.
Yeah.
And number two, to the family needing to revolve around the woman. Like that's truly anti-Mormon.
Yeah.
Because that's happened never at any point, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just
I agree. I agree with you.
What? The family needs to revolve around the woman? What?
Yeah.
That's almost apostate. It's almost apostate.
Yeah. Well, obviously that's where it led us. So I mean, like we go through treatment, and I ended up not having to do chemo, which was huge, but I did end up having a double mastectomy. And that's kind of could be its own, like, I mean, I could talk for hours about what happened to me during treatment, but I think the takeaway from it is that I really feel like this pushed me in a space where I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. And when you kind of have a brush with mortality, it also makes you think like, what am I doing with my life? And I have, like if I want to have a job or if I want to build something special, which is something that, we had talked about yesterday, then what am I doing and what am I waiting for? And, and then I'm somebody that sometimes a conflict will happen and I'll kind of avoid it, like I won't say anything and I'll just be mad about it, but I won't stand up for myself. And so during this time too, I was kind of like a little unhinged. Like I was just like, I'm tired of not saying things. I'm tired of just like being palatable for everybody else. And so, certain things were said and I was calling it out and I was like telling people, I don't think I was like super aggressive. I just think that I just felt like, no, I need to take up space right now. And so I'm going to tell people how I feel and I'm going to, just shape this experience to protect myself and my space. And I think that really put me in a space. I mean, I think it helped me to like get into a space where I was like, no, I have to make changes in my life. I have to do something different. So
and it can be, Jeff, I don't know if you want to comment on this, but like once a Mormon woman starts to find her voice and learn to say no, even if let's just say a husband isn't overtly, sexist or misogynistic, if they've grown up only in a patriarchal system and all they've known are traditional patriarchal families, a wife or a mother gaining her voice and saying no and starting to speak her mind can feel very upsetting and disturbing. And like, even for someone that cares about women and wants equality. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, it was during this time that I think we had identified some of these issues in our marriage, but starting to say, what can we do to address these, which is an ongoing thing. But I think that was, again, a catalyst in us looking at ourselves and realizing that, hey, this is ingrained in us. I mean, this was like built in to our relationship and our marriage from the beginning, via the church, because that was just the norm.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that, like you can have really nice, good people in patriarchal systems. The system is bad, but like you can have good people that are in that system. Cause sometimes we talk about like there's patriarchy in infused into marriages. That doesn't mean your husband's a misogynist. It just means that these are, ideas and structures that we've kind of internalized. So I think there's a lot of really, really great guys that may not understand that, how this has affected them, and, women are complicit in it on some level. And so I think that it's important to note that you can be a really, really great guy and a good husband, but you still might have internalized some of those things. And that's what we found in our marriage.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that you don't even recognize it. You can be a part of it and not even realize that you are a part of that, just because, especially as men, because we're benefiting from it. And so to us, it's not uncomfortable at all. It's just, it's very comfortable to live in that world and in that universe.
Yeah.
So it's easier to not want to fight it, because you don't see it until someone brings it to your attention and helps to point it out. Yeah. And Larissa does that really well.
That's good. We need more direct communication. We do. Mormonism's so full of passive aggressiveness and
I think
stuffing and compartmentalizing and suppressing. We just need to get better at direct communication.
Yeah. So this kind of leads us. So there's two kind of major things that come after because of my breast cancer experiences. Number one is I'm recovering from a double mastectomy, and I was like, I'm going to go back to school. So I had been really like trying to decide like, what should I do? And should I do like a little thing or volunteer here? And I think it kind of like zeroed in for me. And I was like, no, I'm going to go back to school. I need to like get whatever training I need to. And then I want to actually like build something that's special for me. So anyway, so that was one thing is I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go back to school, and our family can help support me, and we can work as a team so that I also can be prioritized. So that's number one. And then number two is that, post breast cancer, I have a couple of different issues going on with my body. So first of all, I'm on medication for the next 10 years, cancer medication. And I have to take that because there's always a concern that there could have been spare cancer cells that got loose in your body. And so I'm on this medication that kind of starves out or kills cancer cells. And I have to take it for 10 years because I did get breast cancer very young. And so like they just, I have a lot of years left to have a recurrence. And so they put me on this medication, but it affects my hormones. So it gives me some, menopause type issues. So this starts causing me some sexual dysfunction type issues with arousal. And, but I also have a kind of a bad association now with my body, because I'm now associating my body and even, my breasts with cancer. So, normally this is something that, women, we equate this with our sexuality. And so now I'm having a psychological connection that's different than what it was before. So now my body is, like when we're trying to like be intimate with each other, now I'm thinking I'm equating this with cancer. And so I start having a lot of issues, and it was just really, really difficult because I think post breast cancer, because I felt like cancer kind of almost robbed me of like my youth and vitality. Once I was done with my treatment, I really was like, I want to get this back. I want to feel like, no, this didn't take that away from me. I still want to be like vibrant and sexual. And like, this is who I want to be. I want to embrace this part of me. And so, but my body isn't cooperating both physically and psychologically. I'm having issues with this. So we decide to go to therapy together. So we see a therapist that's a marriage therapist, but also does sex therapy. And we see him separately first. And then we start doing sessions together as well. And so, this ends up being a huge, maybe like the last final thing that like pushes us over the edge. And it's a really big thing for Jeff. Maybe you want to start and just talk about yours.
So I'm going to backtrack a little here. And I actually took some notes last night when I was thinking about this, because I want to make sure that I touch on some important points. So when I had mentioned before, back when I was young, about masturbation. And when that started, I didn't even know it was masturbation, and it wasn't sexual. And then even, as I got into my, 12 or 13, then it becomes kind of a sexual thing where in your thoughts. But I still didn't realize this was something bad. The church mentioned masturbation, but nobody tells you what it is. So I didn't know that's what I'm doing. So when I figured that out, and I was probably 14, when I realized, oh, I'm masturbating. And then you get the shame and the guilt associated with it. And that's a real interesting thing to me, in the way that you're doing the same thing, but now all of a sudden you're feeling this guilt and shame associated with it. And I think that was the beginning of this guilt and shame cycle. And then along with it is the anxiety, because you do it and you're like, okay, I'm never doing that again. You know, that's the last time. And then it goes by a couple of weeks, and then you do it again. You feel terrible about it. And then again, do you go and tell the bishop, or do you just rationalize and say, no, I'm not going to do this anymore? And that's the cycle that I think that I was in. And the other thing about it, no one talks about it, so you feel like you're all alone in this. And I don't know, John, if you can relate to that, but man, I just felt all alone in that I'm the only one having this issue.
For sure.
What's wrong with me? Why am I like a deviant, or, you know, something weird? Am I a sex fanatic, or, you know, like a nymphomaniac? I didn't know, and I don't have anyone to help me navigate this. No one talks about it, and you can't bring it up to your parents. I mean, and so all you hear is the bad things about masturbation. So every time I'm hearing this in conference or in talks, yeah, I know they're talking to me, and I'm the one, you know, and you think you're the only one, because again, no one ever talks about it.
I think there's at least two really unhelpful correlations that are made within Mormonism, and maybe in broader Orthodox religious context. One is that, well, within Mormonism, sexual sins are equated as being next to murder in seriousness.
Yes.
So there's this amping up of the stakes of the severity of anything sexual. So I think that's problem number one. And then I think problem number two is, in so many Christian contexts I've seen, masturbation, especially if you view images in association with masturbation, which I think is pretty common, it's viewed as comparable to infidelity, as cheating.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so you basically think, if I'm not a murderer, I'm pretty much an adulterer.
Absolutely.
And then how severe? That's really
Yeah.
severe. But in your mind, that's what you're thinking and feeling.
And you're living with that as like a 15, 16-year-old kid, you know? And then sexual images start to go along with that, in looking at things online, and you know, staying up late to watch the HBO show or whatever it was. And that also becomes an issue, because I think this is something that doesn't get talked about enough, is the anxiety around that. You know, I really felt like there is this anxiety with seeing these images that, you know, it's bad, but you're doing it. And I think that creates a pattern that then perpetuates. And again, I think this is really common in the church, even though we don't ever talk about it. I think the anxiety associated with sex causes its own sexual dysfunction and problems. And we'll talk about that more. So then it goes on, and I have intermittent issues with, no issues after my mission for quite a while. And then again, and then you feel terrible right after that happens. I mean, and then there's intermittent issues between then. I meet Larissa, and this was when I was doing therapy, and talking through this. Our therapist was just wanted me to lay all this out there, everything you remember. And so I remember when I met Larissa and I went to my journal, I'd been like keeping this journal and like, trying to like put on there, like, how can I do this? Like, what am I doing? Like, why can't God take this from me? And I tore those pages out, like this chunk of my journal is gone because I didn't want anyone to ever know this was a problem. Again, I'm like, this is never going to do this again. So I tear that out and I like got rid of it. I like cut it up and made sure that no one would ever find that. Larissa would never know that. And that starts this pattern of trying to portray this person that the church wanted me to be and that I wanted to be for the church. And so because of that, we have to look this part. And so we're shoving down this our sexuality, thinking that that's Satan, that sexuality is Satan, and that is Satan tempting me and pulling me into this thing. And it's only through the gospel and through God that I'm going to get out of it. Which is so, again, it's so ironic, as we'll talk later. But so it went through like that, and there was intermittent issues. And then in medical school, Larissa had found out that I'd been looking at this. And so I went to the bishop, like you do.
Looking at pornography.
Pornography.
Sometimes.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
So this is the first time, like that I'm involved, that I know this is a thing, and it wasn't handled well. I mean, we didn't handle it, but this is the thing that's so hard, is that we are not taught. We have almost no sex education, and there's so much fear-based, information about pornography, and so this is very, very scary to me, because I don't know what this means. Does it mean that I'm not good enough? Like, is it because you're not attracted to me? I have no real good information.
And it's very traumatic. I mean, extremely traumatic, right? For LDS women to find this out about their husband who looks this part in this role. And I feel like I am that person, but this is just like this side of me that Satan's trying to pull me into. And I mean, it's traumatic.
And when you say you didn't handle it well, do you want to explain kind of what not handling it well means from your perspective? I mean, I think that we went into like a mode of, I know people will talk about this where like the spouse kind of becomes the warden. So it's like, like I'll have the password to your phone now. And, so I think that we didn't know any other way to handle it. So I was like pretty hardcore, and I'm not proud of this, but I know I said to Jeff, like, if this happens again, then like I will leave you. And
that's a lot.
And I don't like that I said that, but I just, this is what I had learned about, that pornography will ruin your marriage, and like it will make him become like a sexual deviant, and then he won't be a safe person. And so these are the messages that I had got about pornography. And so it was very, very scary. And that's so I took a very hard line.
Yeah, every once in a while, I'll meet a couple where let's just say the wife leaves the husband. And by the way, women can look at porn and masturbate too. But,
yeah, absolutely.
But I'll meet a couple where the wife says, "Oh, my husband looks at porn and masturbates sometimes, so I'm leaving him, and I'm going to go find a man who doesn't do that." And I'm like, okay, you're going to go on this divorce singles market in your 30s and 40s and find a guy that never does this?
Right.
Like, if he never does this, I would wonder whether or not he's into women, first of all, but second of all, like, if your husband is like hardworking and honest and a good dad and a good provider, and in every other way honest, but he's just got this, you're really going to trade that for some guy that tells you he doesn't do it?
Yeah.
Who you don't know, and you don't know what his history is? Like, it's really, really heartbreaking to see this be viewed as a marriage ender.
Yeah.
When we know it's so pervasive. Bishops and stake presidents and mission presidents are doing it. And then, telling their parishioners or missionaries that they need to repent for it. Like,
yes,
it's almost ubiquitous. I'm not trying to make excuses for anything.
Yeah.
I'm just saying my experience is it's well over 50%, if not 90%.
Oh, I bet it's way.
I bet it's in the 90s.
I bet it's in the 90s.
And we'll talk about this more, but I think as we're in therapy together and we like really dig into like what's going on, why is porn use so pervasive and so hidden in the church? What we come to understand is that, like, if you're repressing sexuality, that doesn't mean you have good sexual health. Like whether you're repressing it or whether you have compulsive sexual behaviors, those are both
bad.
Both ways that you're coping with anxiety around sexuality. So
that's brilliant.
Yeah. So either way, and this is also a Jennifer Finlayson 5 thing. She says, like, whether you're anorexic or bulimic, those are both unhealthy.
Or obese.
Yes, they're unhealthy. It's still a bad approach. Yeah.
Obesity or anorexia, bulimia, both are bad. And but Larissa, you came by your reactions to Jeff completely honestly. Yeah. Because like, there's two things the Mormon church hates in the modern era. It's LGBTQ people, LGBTQ behavior and pornography and masturbation. And so you would have been, from a child, constantly hearing how evil and dark and bad pornography is.
Absolutely.
And so you would have felt like your marriage was in jeopardy.
Well, and no one ever talks about having issues. So you don't realize that, again, not just me, but the wives too. You don't realize that it's only my husband. Like, how come my husband has this issue and no one else? Because, right? I mean, you just don't see it. So you just think that you're alone. It's probably a lot better now. I mean, I know it's a lot better now.
Hopefully more people
or at least,
talk about it.
more people are aware of it, but it's still a huge problem. So
I just have to say one other quick thing. We just did an interview with a woman who recently returned home from her mission and lost her faith. While she was a missionary, her mission president was writing her for like she wore like exercise pants during a P-Day or, just really benign things. And she was just racked with guilt over like not dressing perfectly. She comes home from her mission and finds out that the mission president had a policy where if he found male missionaries who were masturbating, he told them, hey, as long as you don't do it more than once a week, you're fine. And so on the one hand, the women were being held to super high standards just for how they dressed and shamed for it. But there was this secret behind the scenes, hey, elder, if you just do it once a week, don't beat yourself up about it. It's, because that's how ubiquitous it was.
Double
If the church sends home every missionary that masturbates, they'll have no more missionaries.
Right.
Or almost no more missionaries, maybe 5.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
Okay,
and they're shoving it down. Yeah.
So at that time, I go to the bishop. I don't take the sacrament, which is a public shaming. Not taking the sacrament because I don't know of anyone who's ever not taken the sacrament for anything but sexual sin, right? So, I mean, you can be a total asshole and be, lying, cheating, stealing, embezzling money, but you can take the sacrament. But if you look at porn, you don't get to take the sacrament. So, I really think it is a form of public shaming, and then at that point, everyone knows too. And that is another thing. And I'm not saying poor me in this instance. I'm just saying I think it's a bad practice.
Were you in the bishopric or in a stake high council when this happened?
No, this was in med school. This was in medical school.
So this was in our early marriage, but you were, I think you were like the executive secretary at the time.
I think I'd just been released as the executive secretary at the time.
Yeah.
So
public shaming.
Yeah, which I think is important to recognize because I do think that is a thing. So since that time, I went a long time after that without any, and this is interesting too that I thought of as we were going through this with my counselor, is there were times I'd go long periods of time and not look at anything. And I thought I was doing great at those times, but those were the times that Larissa's like, "Hey, are you still into me?" And that's, like she's feeling like I'm not into her or I'm not. And so I think that's really interesting again, where we think we're winning this battle, but we're really just snuffing out our sexuality, which again, that's not healthy and it's going to come out in a different way at some point. I really believe that.
There's a double bind there because if you just sort of like sometimes in a marriage, a husband will stop looking at porn, but then say, well, okay, well then now my wife is responsible for all my sexuality and she just needs to be available for whenever I need something sexually. That's bad.
Yeah.
Because it's not the wife's job to like perform on command to meet the man's sexual needs. And so that's what I thought might have happened. But what you're saying is you just shut down your sexuality so that you wouldn't ever feel the desires to masturbate. And that bled over into your attractions to Larissa.
Well, and I think that was part of the scrupulosity, like on my mission, that I just shut it down and just was trying to stay so busy doing that, that was a thing. And then, but I always felt like this was, who talks about white knuckling, JFF or Natasha Helfer, you're just white knuckling this. Like it's always this like anxiety ridden thing that's always there and never, it's something that you think Satan is like after you or tempting you with this thing, which I think is interesting too.
So while we're in therapy, it's kind of interesting because this is all coming out with Jeff in his therapy. And when I'm talking to our therapist about my situation, because I'm having an issue where my body isn't feeling sexually responsive at all, but I'm wanting it to be. And so he's talking to me and he's asking me about like how, if I feel comfortable with my sexuality. And so I think that I was on the repression end of sexuality. And so like I never masturbated ever. Like I never did. I never would have thought to have done that. But I know that I grew up with the For the Strength of Youth pamphlet that said like, never arouse these feelings in yourself or in others. And so I even remember, like watching even like a romantic comedy that kind of starts making you feel tingly and thinking to myself like, oh no, that's bad. I shouldn't have those feelings. And so I think that I had gone, so even though I've never looked at porn, I've never masturbated, but obviously like I've just repressed these things. And it was really interesting because our therapist was asking me, he said, do you understand female fantasy? And I was like, I literally don't. I don't think I have any fantasies. I don't think I fantasize at all. And so he actually gave me a book to read that was really interesting about female fantasy and how, like social aspects influence it. But in this book, she was saying that, a lot of times if you're trying to be a good girl, then that's something that you will repress. And so that you're actually not feeling those types of things. And our therapist, he was like, if you want to help your body to become aroused again, he's like, you might need to do something so that you can have some type of, fantasy or an arousal experience. And so I think this starts shifting our view of pornography or, and for women, they always said to us, like, don't read like a romance novel, because those can be like soft core porn or whatever. But like now I'm in a position where I'm like, am I going to be in trouble if I read a romance novel because I need that so that I can have sex with my husband? Like then you start thinking like, how bad is this? Like if this is something I need to get my body to respond. So we start, I think I definitely, we both are in this place, but we're starting to have a better understanding about what pornography is and
there's another category called erotica, which is not pornography per se, but it's just tasteful, respectful images that help with arousal.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But we lump it all as like, child porn is the same as erotica.
Absolutely.
Come on. Like there's a total difference there.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So during this time, JFF, I remember JFF saying this. I don't remember when I heard her say it, but she talked about true intimacy. In order to have true intimacy, you have to be willing to look yourself in the mirror and accept yourself, the good and the bad. And if you're not willing to do that, you can never let someone else truly know you. And if you can't do that, you can't have intimacy. And so I recognized that this was a part of me that I had been hiding from Larissa. And there's reasons to hide it. And I think this is so common in the church because the consequences of bringing that out. Larissa told me she would leave me. You're in a high church calling, so you go through the repentance process, which would include probably like not taking the sacrament. People know you're doing something sexually, deviant, something, and then you might lose your calling. You're in the church, you're always climbing this ladder, and I think that there's things which I think is why, as Mormon men are so apt to, again, push this underground, rationalize it, move on. And then you get another calling, so you think, oh, God must be okay with me because he gave me this calling. So obviously I'm acceptable, even though I have these like issues. And I also found that I would double down. And I think this, there was at the times that this would happen, I would double down on, we got to get to the temple more. We got to like make sure we're reading I make sure I'm reading my scriptures every day. And I feel like that was kind of my own defense of like, if I'm just doing that, then this will go away. Like I'll be able to squelch out this thing, which is obviously not the way to do it. Right.
Absolutely. Okay.
So Jeff's processing all of this, and so it comes out. So now I'm in a situation which is very triggering for me because we in our early marriage we had gone through this porn situation. So I find out that Jeff has intermittently looked at porn throughout our marriage, and my first reaction was to feel like extremely betrayed. And mostly because I was like, I can't believe that you didn't tell me this. But as we start to really dig into it, I think that we were just in such a better place. And a lot of it is because we're listening to these sexuality podcasts and we're reading all of these things. So we just come at it from such a better place. And so I think that we approach this more from a place of like curiosity. And so, at first I was like really betrayed and I was like, I can't believe that you would lie to me like all of this time. And even for a little bit, I was just like, hey, I don't feel close to you right now. And I don't want you, like, I don't want any like intimacy with you. I don't like, it's off the table right now.
And that's such a problem because if one spouse cuts the other off, then number one, it just affects their emotional intimacy and their connection. But then there's no sexual outlet for either of them.
Yeah.
And that can just start more of a cycle.
Yeah.
And make the problematic behavior more common.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I think there's obviously times when it's okay to say like, I'm drawing a boundary. I don't feel safe with you.
Sure.
But I remember, I'm going through, I'm post breast cancer. So I'm going through a time where I'm wanting to connect more with him and I'm wanting to like dig into my sexuality. And then I was like, you know what, it's off the table. And I remember one night kind of like thinking about this and I thought like, is Jeff really untrustworthy? Or is, does this mean that he's not trustworthy and not safe? Or is there a reason that he didn't tell me this? And how am I complicit in that? Like, why was I not a safe person for him to talk to? And why would he think that hiding this was the best option? And so I think that was like a good change for me because I was like, no, I know he's safe. And we have built a good life together, but this is a thing that needs to be addressed. And so I think that kind of shifted things for us where I said, like, no, he is safe. And I know that he is trustworthy, but I need to understand why hiding this and lying to me was the best option. And that's when we start looking into this validation cycle of church leadership and how you are going to be continually rewarded for hiding it. Right? Because you'll get in other callings and, you'll have more authority and everyone will think that you're like super righteous. So there's so many rewards for just burying it and keeping it underground.
For sure. So this led to us finding the Rethinking Porn podcast. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Oh, you need to link that for sure.
Okay. Rethinking.
Yeah. Rethinking Porn.
It's called Rethinking Porn Addiction.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Rethinking Porn.
So we found this through Jennifer Finlayson Fife. So it was just recommended by, I don't know if it was by her or somebody from her Facebook group, but it's really, really good.
There's two sex therapists, one, Doug Braun-Harvey, who is really done a lot of work. He came up with the 7 principles of sexual health. That Natasha Helfer's done some series with him. And he's
not LDS. He's a PhD psychologist, and he's really like one of the foremost experts on men's sexual health. And he's California based. And then there's a Kristen Hodgson's on it, so she's an LDS sex therapist.
Are you familiar with her?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, she's fantastic. And then there's 4 LDS guys that are on this podcast, and they're just kind of like normal LDS guys that are talking about their experiences.
And as I'm listening to them talk about their experiences growing up and their experiences with porn and with masturbation, I'm like, that's my story. Tell all of them, all of them have a little different story, but it's my story. And that helped me to realize that, man, this is not just me. This is like, maybe not all of us in the church, but so many of us in the church. And we all feel so alone. We're all in this issue. And that, I'm telling you, that was like a light switch to me to be like, man, I thought the church was the only thing like holding me from being like this, this porn addict, and come to find out that they're creating this problem with their purity culture and with the way that they have like made this thing such a problem, and the anxiety around it and the guilt and the shame around it. And I'm telling you, when I that podcast, Larissa listened to it too, but I feel like it was hearing their stories was so soothing to me to know that, oh my gosh, this was so many men in the church are having this issue, and it's a church-wide issue, more in the church than out of the church. Why is that? because it's the church that's creating this problem. And then, of course, they're giving you a way to solve it. But it's like, man, if you take that away, why is it not such an issue other places? Why is porn so much, like, I think Utah's number one, right? And I bet if you looked at the other states, it's the ones who have the most purity culture, the most, rigid Christian churches, or maybe not just Christian, but whatever churches that are rigid like that, because it makes those things such a problem and such an issue. And I'm convinced of that, 100%.
Yeah.
So we're realizing going through this that the church has created its own porn issue because of the high anxiety around sexuality and because of the bad information. And so it's just, I feel like it was like really mind-boggling. And we're listening to these guys, like one of them's talking about how he has had to sit outside the temple for like several of his siblings' weddings because he was trying to be a good person and confessed to his bishop that he had looked at porn. And so he's outside, like he doesn't even get to be there when his siblings getting married.
Because his bishop was obviously the one who's taken a hard line. And so how many people are in that wedding who are looking at porn, but he's outside multiple times, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it was heartbreaking.
It was
he's
really
telling
sad.
the story.
The honest people are often the ones that are punished.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And shamed and guilted the most, right?
Yeah.
And they think that they're the worst because they're actually confessing it rather than forcing it underground.
Yeah.
We've thought a lot about this. Why are men in the church seeking out porn? And I really think it all goes back to, we want to portray this pure, honest, like, I don't have sexuality. And even the sexual intimacy with their wife, I think, is very superficial or first level, because you don't want people to know that you have kinks or you have, you're interested in these things. And so they find that through porn. So they live their life, and then they go to their private browsers, and then they live this other life there. And I honestly think this is I think it's so prevalent in the church. I really do. I think more than we even know, because I just think that it is, the church makes this such an issue, and it's so hard for men to admit it and then try and seek help. And then what does the church do? They put them in their 12-step program. You probably get released from your calling. I mean, I just think there's so many bad consequences to doing it, that it's so much easier to just push it underground, either rationalize it or lie about it, which I think is the thing that happens so often.
And and Natasha and I did an episode on a new approach to pornography and masturbation.
Mm-hmm.
I'll put a link to that as well.
Yeah.
There's also this dynamic that masturbation provides a release of positive chemicals in the brain. And that, once you combine shame and stigmatization with some type of mechanism to relieve the suffering, that can also contribute to a downward spiral where you're feeling so much guilt and shame produced by the church that the way you self-medicate the shame is to masturbate to feel better, because masturbation makes you feel better. And so in our estimation, that's one of the reasons why the church and the way they handle it actually makes the problem worse.
Yes.
We interviewed someone recently that said that they were taught to pair Jeffrey Dahmer with masturbation. And they were taught in a Mormon context that Jeffrey Dahmer became a serial killer because he started looking at porn and masturbating.
Oh, Ted Bundy. I heard that too. Yeah. Ted Bundy's my dad.
I meant Ted Bundy, not Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yeah.
But when you pair serial killers with porn and masturbation, you're just upping the stakes ridiculously. Yeah.
I mean, you're essentially saying this is what can become of you if you're going to masturbate. You're going to be it's not that he was a sociopath. It's the fact that he looked at porn. That's what made him a serial killer. It's just so intense.
That's right.
Yeah. It's the messaging is so intense. And I know that, I think that I listened to that podcast that you did with Natasha Helfer, and I know that she talks about eroticism, and that's something that we have no understanding of this. And I think, when I'm talking to my the therapist, and he's talking to me about like female fantasy and developing these things, I think this is the first time I start to understand that, like, everybody has different eroticism, you know, like there's different things that are arousing to you. And I think that there are many people within the church that are kind of disgusted by their own eroticism. And it doesn't even have to be super strange or weird, but they feel like, even if they're like, oh, I really love it when my wife wears this, you know, like outfit or whatever, you know, like I love my wife in lingerie. Like I know for a fact there are men who feel like they are gross or disgusting because they have these things where.
And their wives also feel that that's gross, or why do you even have this in your head, right? Because they're sexually repressed, and so I think that's part of it too.
But none of us were taught about eroticism, and so we don't embrace it or say like, yeah, this is a thing, and this is how we have a conversation about it in our marriage, and you know that doesn't obviously like what we learned is that you have to be open about, you have to know who you are, be open about who you are, and then have conversations and say, you know, like, are you okay with this? And if you're not, that's okay. Like, well, you know, like, how do we work this in or not work this in? Like, but there's no conversation. There's no conversation. There's no education about it. And then when you have all these like bad messaging and the anxiety around it, you've created a huge, huge issue. And I think it's epidemic in the church. And
another reason that I know that this is epidemic is because we're on the JFF Facebook group. I don't remember, ask a LDS or ask a sexual therapist, something. But
it's a huge group. There's probably 20,000
people will post for like, give us your advice. And usually it's anonymous, but every single day it's like, I found out my husband's looking at porn. And I'm like, yeah, of course you did, because we all are, because this is what the church has created for us. I mean, it's so sad. I realize it's traumatic, and I don't mean to make light of that, because it is traumatic for a female to recognize that. What bothers me so bad is where this is all coming from. And so as I went through this, and we went through this podcast, and I feel like it helped Larissa a lot to understand. She's like, is this what you have felt like? Because they're going back and talking about how they felt.
I felt like it was heartbreaking for me, because when the guy was talking about like sitting outside the temple multiple times, and I remember I was crying at one point, and I said to you, like, is this what you've been going through in your life? And he was like, yeah, I feel like they're telling my exact story. And I mean, it was devastating for me to know that like you experienced this and that you felt this shame, and I didn't know. I wasn't a part of it. And yeah, I feel like it really like made my heart break for like 14-year-old Jeff and for 6-year-old Jeff that like was made to feel shame about his body and his sexuality. And obviously I can also relate to this on some level as well. So it really like put us in a place.
Absolutely. And we talk about this pretty openly, but it's been a long haul. I mean,
it was a process.
This was definitely a process,
and what was going on
to make it to where we're at. But this is what I can say that's also so interesting for me is after we had opened up these lines of communication, after I truly embraced who I was and let Larissa know who I was, and we did this therapy together, and we came up with an agreement plan that this like pull of looking at porn for me, and I'm not saying this is good, I'm not putting myself up on a pedestal, but I'm saying this because I know a lot of people are going to say you left the church because you wanted to look at porn, but I haven't. That desire, this pull that was there before, is not there, and I actually.
Or the
this compulsion is not there. And I really think, again, because you're in this cycle and the anxiety and all of these things around it that make this such a bigger issue. And Larissa and I now can watch, some erotic, I won't call it porn, but erotic or like
do we want to watch something steamy or like this is
and I can go to Larissa and I can say, hey, I'm feeling like I need something more right now. And so it's so nice to feel like, no, we're on the same page. And I don't need to hide this sexuality that I was, that she thinks I'm a deviant or some sick pervert or something like that, right? I mean, it really is a difference when you're on the same page. The other thing that I think so interesting about this that I don't think that I was saying is the anxiety around it, and I think you develop this feedback loop, kind of what you both were alluding to when you're saying, the shame and the guilt, and then you masturbate, and then you like resolve, and then the shame and the guilt, and then you have the orgasm, and then the shame and the guilt comes back. So you develop this feedback loop. But along with that is the anxiety. And I really think that anxiety is a big problem. And I don't have any data for this, but I bet it's a big problem with performance, both like premature ejaculation and erectile dysfunction, all these things that I bet you are big issues that again can be because of the anxiety and the problem around this issue.
Yeah. And can I just say, I've counseled with countless people about this. When the couple gets to the point where they're able to have an open, healthy, candid conversation where the viewing spouse can say to the non-viewing spouse, hey, I do this sometimes. Here's why. Will you still love me? And if the non-viewing spouse is like, hey, don't worry about it. I love you. Let's just figure out how to make our relationship better. Let's just figure out how to have better emotional intimacy. Let's see if we can improve our sexual intimacy. And if this is not a deal breaker, even if it's the decision that the non-viewing spouse would prefer the viewing spouse to stop viewing.
Right.
Even if that's still the case.
Which is reasonable, right? You make an agreement and that's reasonable.
As long as it's not a deal breaker and as long as there's open, healthy communication, in almost every instance, the desire to view declines. Now that doesn't mean it disappears.
No.
But it declines significantly. And I can tell you that before I disclosed to Margie, and I did, I disclosed to Margie at some point in 2012 that I had occasionally looked at pornography and masturbated. Margie cried when I disclosed, but then she's like, I love you, and let's just figure this out.
Yeah.
The minute that happened, the compulsivity of it disappears.
Isn't that so interesting?
And it's never returned in terms of the compulsivity.
Yeah.
It's become a lot less interesting to me, and I am much, much more interested in a happy, healthy sexual engagement with Margie than I am. And I would say that for me, the desire to look at porn and masturbate has dramatically decreased and often is just completely non-existent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my sex life with Margie has dramatically improved. That's been our experience.
Which is so interesting, right? Because the church is putting you into their little program, but the root cause is the church and their messaging. That's the root cause. And so to me, it's like, gosh, it's so crazy. But this was such a deal breaker for me because the fruit, right? That was my whole thing, was the fruit was good. So I thought the church again was keeping me from Satan's grasp. And then to realize, no, the church has created this problem. That was like the thing that pulled the card out. And I mean, it came down. I shouldn't say it came down, but it gave me reason to really think, I don't know if the church is true. And it gave me a reason then to go and to search out, because I had known the church history issues. I had put them in a place, but then I think that gave me the ability to go and look without that jaded lens and say, okay, I want to find out if the church really is what it says it is at that point.
And just super quickly, I have to call attention to this because I don't think the Mormon church or church leaders do this intentionally, but the reason why there's a conflict of interest here between the church being a moral policeman and the sexual lives of married couples is the following. It is objectively true that the Mormon church needs you to need them. They need you to need them. And so how do they get you to need them? Well, if you feel guilt and shame as a viewer, or if you're a terrified spouse thinking that your viewing spouse is about to become Ted Bundy.
Yes.
Right.
In either case, you need the church.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And so the non-viewing spouse is going to cling to Christ and faith and their bishop.
Go into the temple.
To save their marriage, to save themselves from being married to Ted Bundy. And then the viewing spouse feels so much guilt and shame that they're going to repent and go to the 12-step program and act like they're an addict.
And try and white knuckle, right? The whole time they're just white knuckling this thing and just waiting for that to break again, because most likely it's going to, because again, you haven't taken you haven't taken the root out. You haven't gotten to the root of the problem.
And in that case, it's actually it's in some ways similar to the LGBTQ dilemma, because we all know now that praying the gay away doesn't work. It's toxic. It makes you suicidal. Praying the sexual drive away, looking to Jesus to save you of your sexual drive, does not work.
Right.
It makes it worse. And so the church it has a conflict of interest. They cannot and should not be in the business of policing sexuality because it's in their self-interest to create the sexual dysfunction that then they offer themselves as the solution for, when in reality they're creating and exacerbating the problem.
So they create the disease and then a cure for the disease.
And I'm not going to say it's intentional. That's the outcome.
I agree with you. I don't think it is intentional, but it's a really nice way to keep people feeling like the church is the only thing that's holding them from being this, whatever, right? And so you are relying on the church to think that you're doing this. Or, we were talking to someone the other day and they're telling their husband has like 4 different locks on his phone because he doesn't. And it's like, God, what are we doing? Like really, what are we doing? Like, this is your sexuality. You're obviously not getting something your sexuality is telling you it needs. And that's the problem. So it's better to dig in and say, what's my sexuality telling me? What's the issue here? Rather than locking it down with like 9 different things that, you're just asking for that to be a bigger anxiety provoking thing that you're going to break through and do that. It's such a weird double-edged sword that you're dealing with.
And I learned from Natasha in the retreats that we've done together that it's never good for a spouse. A spouse should be a partner, a lover, a friend.
Yes.
It's never good for a spouse to be a parent or a policeman.
Yes.
Because that kills intimacy.
It changes that dynamic and it kills it. Yes, I agree with that 100%.
So when your spouse is, where were you? Did you look at, is the filter on? Let me see your phone.
Right.
Like that's an intimacy killer. You're not going to be sexually aroused and attracted to someone who's acting like your authority, your mom.
Right.
You're a police officer trying to get you.
Yes.
So again, that kills intimacy.
Yeah.
Really quickly, before we kind of leave this, I do want to, because I think we're going to get to the faith crisis stuff really soon.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people that hear this type of discussion and say, well, you're just like porn apologists. You're pro-porn. Porn is awful. And whenever you talk like this, it just makes me feel like you're telling the world that porn's a good thing. What would be your response to those types of criticisms that people are saying we're trying to justify porn or say that porn is a good thing?
This is what's so interesting to me is those people, because I see them all the time saying, you just wanted to look at porn, that's why you left the church. This is a common thing on Twitter. And I think, why would you think that? Like, why is porn so front and center in your mind that you think that's why we would leave? Do you know what I mean? Like, because they're looking at it. That's why. To me, it's like, it's so blatant. If you really think that someone's leaving the church to look at porn, why do you think that? Because you obviously have got an issue going on. I really think they're playing their hand. They're showing you what they got when they say that.
No, but there's terrified, we'll say non-viewing spouses, usually the wife, and they're just like, no, you're never going to convince me that porn's anything other than awful. And it sounds like you're trying to justify porn. And they'll list very credible things. The treatment of women, diseases, abortions, abuse, child porn, like just the coarseness of the industry, the fact that it takes partners away from connection. Like there are legitimate problems with porn and with the porn industry.
Absolutely.
And so let's just assume it's those types of concerns. What do you say about that?
So I would say that I don't think that I would never say that I'm pro pornography, but I think that what I've learned is that pornography is sexual. It's sexual imagery, right? It kind of just is what it is. And then there's very bad kinds, and then there's maybe some that there's now like a whole industry that's like ethical porn. And so I think that it's important. Just like you're saying, there are very, very, very harmful types of pornography. Women are often like hurt, or it shows power differentials that are very unhealthy. So I think that that's why we really loved this Rethinking Porn Addiction podcast, because this psychologist in there lays out the principles of good sexual health. And if you apply those to like what you're viewing or what you're, then a lot of it is like, was it consensual? Is there exploitation involved? And so if you apply these things, then you can decide how you want to engage and what's the most healthiest way. But I think in general, just saying like every sexual imagery thing or anything that arouses you is bad. I think that's when we're getting into a territory. So that's what I don't want to say. I also don't want to say that all porn is good or I'm pro porn or everybody go out there and look at porn, because I think that we settled into a place where I wasn't just like, yeah, just look at porn and masturbate and like do your thing. And I think couples can find a healthy, happy place and just say like, hey, as long as it's ethical, then it's fine with me. But I felt like that wasn't okay with me. And so we created a different agreement around like, what do we think, or how is this, what's a healthy way? If we do want to engage in something that involves sexual imagery, how do we do that? So, pro porn would be like one side, and saying all of it is wrong and bad and evil is also on the other side. And I think that we have to say that like porn is what it is. It's sexual imagery. And so you have to assess, is this dangerous? What is it doing? Like, what am I getting from it? Yeah. Is it keeping me from being intimate with my spouse? And I think that if we try to like live by these, sexual health principles, then I think that kind of helps us to decide what is appropriate for us and what is not. And every couple gets to figure out what that is.
And one of those principles too is shared values, right? So together you decide, what are our values? And as long as it's not compromising someone else, which what's that principle?
Exploitation.
Yeah, exploitation. Yeah, and so I agree, that's a good way to go about it. But even you can make this case that all porn is terrible, but it doesn't change the fact that some huge percentage of the church men are looking at it. So, you've got to deal with that. And
including bishops and stake presidents.
I think so.
Yeah.
And I'm not pointing any fingers, because there may be some people that aren't doing any of that. But again, I would say they're probably not healthy either, because I think that they're probably snuffing theirs out and repressing it, which again is going to come out in some other way that's not healthy, because our sexuality is part of us. It's a part of our needs, and we need to learn how to live with that, and life's a lot better when you learn to live with it, and you learn to like make that
embrace your sexuality,
and learn how to
don't be disgusted by it,
to not be scared to find pleasure. I feel like in the church, pleasure is like this sinful word, and that's another thing they talked a lot about on that.
And since we became really open about this too, we've found that other people will say things to us. And a lot of them are our church friends that are in leadership callings, people who are bishops or work for CES or like have come to us. Like once we started just being open and talking about it, and they'd say like, yeah, I've looked at porn too. And so it is something like, this isn't just like these gross people do that, but all the righteous people don't. That's not the case. The church has a huge, huge issue with anxiety around sexuality.
And like Larissa said, it's so interesting because this guy came, when he heard we had left church, he wanted to come and help us. And it was really nice. We had a great conversation. But he disclosed to us that he's had issues with it. And we created this environment, right? The church doesn't do that. There's no room for it. And so, and again, it perpetuates this shoving it down, putting the perfect face up, and it's not healthy, and it's not good, and it doesn't. And again, that's the fruits. And if you want to change the fruits, I don't know how you do it, but that's the fruits.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
I think, and when we're in this Facebook group, and it's all people that listen to Jennifer Finlayson Fife. And so, people kind of talk and we'll discuss things and share issues. And I think, and it's a huge group. And so I think this was interesting because it's mostly LDS couples, and we're hearing people talking about high levels of sexual dysfunction. And it's like many posts every single day. And so as we're looking at this and we're dealing with this sexual dysfunction in our lives, I'm starting to think, what was the purpose of like temple marriage? And I'm supposed to save myself for marriage, and I'm not supposed to like look at anything or touch myself or do anything until marriage. And then once you get married in the temple, then then you live happily ever after. And now I'm realizing that's a lie. Like you sold us something that you just we got from it was sexual dysfunction. You know, like what was the benefit of that? And it is so common for people in this group to say, I actually wish I would have been more sexual experienced before I got married so that I knew what I was doing or so that I understood how my body worked. And there's tons of women. I think men might be more, because of social conditioning, might be more prone to compulsive behaviors, and women may be more prone to repressive behaviors. And again, I don't think it's biological. I think it's because of social conditioning.
And there's exceptions on both sides.
Yeah, on both sides. Yeah. But I do think that that's a thing. And one thing, the book that my therapist gave me that was about women and female fantasy. One thing that the author wrote, and she's a researcher that just works with women's sexuality. She said, she was talking about how important female masturbation is because she says it teaches a woman that they own their bodies. And that just hit me so hard because I was taught in the church that, you know, like my sexuality belonged to my husband. I save it for my husband. It's not for me. It's for him so that he can, you know, fulfill his sexual urges when he gets married. And it was so empowering to hear her say that, like, that no, my sexuality is for me. It's for me. And obviously I want to help me build intimacy with my spouse, but my body is not for somebody else. It's mine. And this is my experience. And I had never connected that is part of the experience of masturbation, is knowing that like, it's mine and it's me. And so I don't know, we had this like very strong shift about masturbation and about, you know, there's so much literature about how this is even a healthy form of, you know, a healthy part of sexual development. And so, yeah, I think that we just really got to this place where we were saying, you know, we know the church is toxic for LGBTQ individuals. We know that there's racism. We know that there's all these things. But this was so eye-opening because we then were like, no, it's harming just everyday people. Like, even if the church is working for you and you're in leadership and you're doing the things and you're accepted, the church can still have a really, really significant negative impact on your relationships. And the church is always saying, their thing right now is that they always say family-centered, church-supported. Like, we're a family-centered church, and family, it's about time. But I was like, you're hurting my family. You're hurting my marriage. Like, this is it. This is the most important thing to me. And that's when I feel like that was just the final straw for us, is that we're like, no, it's hurting everybody. And we have to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, so well said. I'm really excited to get on to your story, but because we're really digging and diving kind of deep here, there's one last thing I want to cover. Yeah. And I want to start by telling a quick story. I'm on an airplane few years back, and I run into a friend from BYU, a married friend, Mormon guy. And he's like, hey, John, how's it going? I haven't seen you in a long time. Well, how's life? Oh, it's great. What are you doing? Oh, I'm on a business trip with my wife. And I'm like, oh, cool. You're with your wife. And he's like, well, it's not so cool. And he starts to tell me how he was an addict. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're an addict. Thank you for telling me. I'm so sorry. And I'm thinking, what, is it meth? Is it heroin? And he's like, oh no, you know, my wife caught me masturbating and looking at porn. And, you know, the church taught me that this was an addiction and I needed to join a 12-step program to deal with my addiction. And, but I go on business trips. I'm a sales rep and I have to go on business trips. So the only way that I can deal with my addiction is I pay for my wife to come with me on every sales call that I make. And so she travels with me as a full-time job to help me manage my addiction. And I just thought, whoa, like, you're an international sales rep and your wife pays to travel with you all over the world to police your sexuality because you think you're an addict. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is to introduce this idea of the church's 12-step program, that whether it's Fight the New Drug, which is a campaign, or the church's 12-step program, there are deep mental health problems with likening porn and masturbation, which is normative and arguably healthy, with meth or cocaine or alcohol addiction. Do you either of you have thoughts or feelings about that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, when you're 16 and you're wondering why you have this strong pull to masturbate and strong pull to look at porn, you think that you are an addict. I mean, I did. I honestly did. And one of the guys in the Rethinking Porn podcast, he got sent to he went to sent him to some intensive sex
a really
addict thing. And he said he's sitting there thinking, wait, these guys are looking at porn like it's straight, like hardcore,
like
stuff.
Spending all their family money
I'm
on
looking up something online for and not to put some, there's not some amount that makes it good or bad, but I'm just saying he felt totally out of place. But again, the church's idea of this is who you are. As a matter of fact, there was a study, wasn't there? They asked people at BYU. That
came out of BYU about people that identified as addicts, but they weren't showing addictive behavior. They might have been showing unhealthy, compulsive behavior or things like that around sexuality, but they were not showing addictive behavior.
So they had them fill out a form of what their behavior was, and then they asked them, "Are you an addict?" And the ones who said they were an addict, which was a lot, I think, they didn't meet the criteria by any stretch of the imagination.
I was a counselor at Utah State University for 6 years to Mormon return missionaries, basically. Mm-hmm. They would come in and self-identify as addicts, and it turns out they would masturbate once every 3 weeks for 20 minutes, and they were calling themselves addicts.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And think of the psychological damage of believing that you are an addict.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's so sad, John, is they're doing it once every 3 weeks because they feel so much guilt and shame that's how long it takes for that to build up. Yeah. And then they do it again. Mm-hmm. And then they start this cycle, again, this reinforcing cycle of orgasm and then guilt and shame associated with and the anxiety around building up to that point where you're going to go ahead and do it. So there's anxiety with it. I think that can't be stressed enough because I've lived it. I know that's true.
And we've had past episodes on the church's 12-step program and how problematic it is. We'll try and include links to that, but that's its own problem, its own episode. Let's get back to your story. So
at this point, we are identifying that the church is causing significant harm to maybe the majority. People are really experiencing this. And what we also found is that we think that the more involved you are in the church, like we were involved just about as much as you could be. The more involved you are, we think the church will have greater harm on you. So I think there are probably people in the church that maybe are kind of have good differentiation from the church, or they're not in a weird codependent relationship with the church, but they're kind of separated and they're not going to be put in leadership, and they're not gonna, and I think that there's people that find happiness in that place. But what we found is that the harder we were going, the more involved we were, the higher you climb, the more it is harming you, is what we found. So we kind of took different approaches. So at this point, Taylor Petrie had just written his book, Tabernacles of Clay. And I think I even saw this from Patrick Mason, that he had recommended it and said, this is an amazing book. It had won the Mormon History Association award. So I wanted to understand, what's the church's history of dealing with sexuality? Has it always been this weird? What happened with it? So I got that book and I started reading it through the summer. In fact, I was taking my kids to the pool, and I would just I had my little book, my Taylor Petrie sexuality book, and I read it through the summer. So that was kind of my first start into saying, what is going on with the church that it's creating so many levels of toxicity on so many levels, and sometimes it makes me sad that sometimes I look back and I think I should have left the church over racism. That was enough. I should have left the church at the November 15th policy. That would have been enough. Just in and of itself, I should have left. I should have left when I identified patriarchy. But some of these things we are constantly surrounded by apologetic, excuses for why these things exist. And that it almost is we live our whole lives with these excuses. And so it just takes a long time for those things to kind of combine and build up. But yeah, we got to the point where we were what's going on with the church? And if this is really harming people, then why would God allow these things to become institutionally infused into the church? These aren't just random, the gay problem. These are really big issues that cause huge amounts of harm.
Well, you're not saying the gay issue isn't a big issue, right?
Yeah, I'm saying that people talk about it like it's kind of like, oh, like it's kind of problematic with the race thing, but like I'm saying like these are the issues. These are like the biggest issues that I feel like we're dealing with as like human beings is like human rights issues and like treating people and allowing people to identify the way that they need to and eradicating racism. But these are the issues that have become institutionalized within the church. So our question is, did God allow these to be institutionalized in his church? Because I know that the church is full of imperfect people, but would God allow these to like become so ingrained? So
why? If he did, why? Why did God do that?
Why did he let that happen, And so, so I went one way. So I was still kind of, I don't know why, I was still kind of like holding on to the church approved. But Taylor Petrie was a stretch for me. So I started to go Taylor Petrie. But interestingly enough, Jeff took like once Jeff saw this, he was like off the cliff. Like he was just like.
Well, so I remember two things speaking to our therapists, and this was when I was still, before Larissa and I had done sessions together, I was still doing it alone. And I'm talking to him and he's saying, well, Jeff, why do you think this? Like, what's making you do that? And I go, well, in our church, we have a prophet and the prophet is taught this is what it is. And he's like a prophet. And I'm like, yeah. He goes, what does that mean? And I go, well, that God is telling him like what we need to be doing. And he goes, oh, that's really dangerous. Like to him, he's like, what in the world? Like, that's really dangerous. And it was this weird thing where I'm like, yeah, that is really dangerous. Like, that's really dangerous. And it's funny that it took and it was probably just the perfect storm of all these things coming together for him to say that. And then
you're saying that the teaching that God speaks to prophets is dangerous. Is that what you mean?
That's what he was.
Believing that a man
he was trying to get to why.
Dangerous.
Say that again.
He was saying that believing that a man speaks for God is dangerous.
I agree.
Yes.
I agree. It's one of the most dangerous things in the world.
Yes.
It's too much power.
It's a lot of power.
But that's so conditioned inside of us that it took that moment for me to be like, yeah, like that is crazy and so much of what I've done for 40 years of my life is because of this, believing that this man is talking to God. And so that was one moment. And then the other one was when we were talking and I'm coming to this realization, and the house of cards had recently fallen. I think that was the last time I talked to him. And he said, Jeff, I feel like your blinders have come off. And he called them the scales of darkness falling from my eyes. And it's so funny because that's the verse we always use when we're like teaching people and to come into the church, right? The scales of darkness fell. And he was referring that to me. And it was like this perfect classic. And he had no idea how perfect it was. But I'm like, he goes, Jeff, I feel like I see the scales of darkness falling from your eyes. And I had this moment and I asked him, I said, do I need to leave the church? And he goes, Jeff, that's the $50,000 question and only you can answer that. But that's the first time I had ever even contemplated that being a thing. Like, could I leave the church? And even though this stuff had crumbled, I had never, ever been able to think of myself outside of the church. I mean, it's like, it's so hard to do. It's like in our bones, right? I mean, this is everything that every decision I make on a daily basis, the church is influencing in one way or another.
How we dress.
Yes.
Our food, right? On some level, our food, like where we spend our money. I mean, what we do during the week, Jeff never cycles on Sunday, even though his friends go cycling on Sunday because, so this is affecting so many aspects of our life.
So when that happened, and again, it gave me the ability then to look at the church and go back and be like, okay, I want to know if this is really true. And you may say I had a bias at that point. And yes, because I was open to it not being true for the first time in my life. When I had read Rough Stone Rolling, I wasn't looking to see if the church was true. All I was looking for was reinforcement that how these things could be put together in a way so that I could make sense of it and not have to stress out or to worry about it. And it did that for me. Now, when you start to take these issues apart, and it didn't take long. I mean, a few Mormon Stories episodes and looking into, I mean, I think the first thing was the Book of Abraham, and I'm like, oh gosh, that's the smoking gun. And then it was polygamy, and I'm like, oh gosh, that's the smoking gun when you really start to dig into that. And then it was like the happiness letter. I remember like going back through that and being like, oh my gosh, that's like its own smoking gun. And then the priesthood restoration. And I mean, it just goes, the list just keeps going of things that don't add up. And
basically everything that we're covering in the LDS discussion series.
You would never,
Mormon Stories, yeah.
And like
all
Mike,
those things we've had.
And Mike always says this. He says you would never give another church the leeway that members give our church of like the benefit of the doubt with so many things, you know, and it really is. And so things toppled again quickly for me at that point, quicker than Larissa, interestingly, because she was so far in front of me as far as this process she had been going through, which I think is. I don't know why that is with Mormon men. I think that's more common of the women kind of going. I mean, you didn't have that type of thing. You had a long, slow thing too. But
well, to be clear, I lost my faith in 2001. I just thought you could do the progressive route as a non-believer. But even then, it took 15 or 20 years to lose my faith because I started at BYU.
Yeah.
But it's just way too hard in a high demand religion. There's way too many forces gravitating, pulling you to stay. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So Jeff surprisingly took a real dive.
Did he pass you up?
He just went for it. And I was kind of like, whoa, like this is a thing. And then I was getting worried about him because I was like, I'm worried that you're listening to these podcasts and you're in an echo chamber. That's what I said.
Which podcast?
This podcast.
Mormon Stories is an echo chamber.
That's what I thought.
Oops.
You know
Try
what
not
else?
to be.
Well, I had a change of heart.
She'd never listened.
I never listened to it. So Jeff gets into Mormon Stories, and he starts saying things to me, and he's like, "Oh, you've got to listen to this thing about the Book of Abraham." And I was kind of like,
the Robert Rittner episode.
Yeah, is that what you listened to? Yeah. And I was kind of like, what is even the deal with the Book of Abraham? Like, why is that even significant at all? I had no idea. And I think what's shocking is for us in this experience is you don't realize how fast everything comes crumbling down, but it's because there's so much information that's good information out there that you're just like, oh, nope, that's not true. It's just, there's so much that's kept from us in the church that you don't realize is out there. And then once you just open the door and you can even, this is what one of my things is I was like, are people saying church history things, but they're putting a spin on it? Are they putting a spin on it to manipulate people? And so it wasn't till I started looking into things that I was like, oh no, there's not a spin, these are the facts. And even if there was a spin, you can point it, you can still figure out these are the facts, this is what we know. And so you can really tell the difference between bias and no, this is just the reality of the situation. And so I think that it comes crumbling down really fast once you open the church history.
And one of the things that bothered me so bad was when I was going through this whole thing, our sexuality journey, and JFF was talking about if you can't look yourself in the mirror and be honest with who you are and know yourself, no one can ever know you. Intimacy is gone. If you're not willing to do it, no one else is going to be able to do it. And I thought of the church, and I said, dude, the church is not willing to look itself in the mirror and square with who it really is, right? It wants to portray this image of who it is, but it doesn't ever deal with these issues. I mean, the racism's never been dealt with. The polygamy, it's never been dealt with. They just put these things, they kind of make flowery little things about them and then kind of try and push them underground. And the only thing that made them come to light was the internet and the information, right? Is the only thing, the reason the church has somewhat tried to square with it with the gospel topics essays. But to me, that was, I got really resentful at that point because I'm like, man, the church expects me to go and to be this type of person, but they won't do it. The church institution won't do it itself. And that again was something where I felt like I started to get angry when I saw it had affected me. It affected our relationship. It was affecting our family. And then to see that feeling like this was hypocrisy on their part, that was, yeah. And so it for me came down and I actually remember this night. we were in our bedroom. You remember, right?
Yeah.
And I told her, I said, I don't think I want to go to church anymore. And I said, and I don't think I want to pay tithing anymore. And she got really panicked. And I said, but I'm willing to, as long as you feel like we need to, I will support you and I will go, because I realized it was probably a little too much too soon.
He kind of jumped the gun with me. Yeah. So I just wasn't at that point. And seriously, it just took a few podcasts and he was just like, goodbye. I'm like heading off the cliff. So I was really upset at that point and worried. And you know what? It was that night when we were having this conversation that I had this thought in my mind when he's telling me this, and I'm thinking like, oh, Jeff's going to leave the church and then I'm going to be that woman. Like I'm going to be the mixed faith marriage person. And this is the thing that I grew up with, that I worked so hard in my life to not be. And that was my thought in my mind, is I can't be that person. I can't be that person that everyone's feeling bad for me because her husband lost his way. But I caught myself and I thought, that is so messed up that that's my concern. Like that should not be my concern right now, is who am I or what do I look like? So I think at this point I had enough awareness that I was trying to, be a certain image in the church, but it was still there. I was like, I can't be that person in the church, the one with the wayward husband. I can't be that. And then I immediately was like, Larissa, that's messed up. Like you have to understand like how weird your relationship is with the church. So yeah, Jeff was ready to leave.
And I remember my last high council meeting, and I'm in there, and this was in COVID, but it was
2021.
2021.
So this was the summer of last year.
And I'm in my last high council meeting, and it was so hard to be there even. But the topic was, how do we get people to come back to church?
Because after COVID, a lot of people weren't coming to church. And it was a huge thing.
And the recommendations around the table, so many of them, we got to cut off the Zoom feed. So we're going to force their hand. And I'm just sitting there thinking, do you ever wonder why? Why do they not want to come back to church? And, what is it? Because we realized how miserable it is on Sunday with the church and how nice it was to be home. I mean, seriously, it was so much nicer. And so I went home and I told Larissa, I'm like, hey, I've got to call the stake president and tell him that I need to meet with him. And so I met with him. He was very, very nice. He actually tried to do we want your voice, we need your voice on here because of and I said, no, I can't do it. I just, not in good faith.
It's a self-betrayal.
I said, and I told him, I said, I'm seeking for the truth. And if the church has the truth, I think I'll find my way back because because if it's true, I want that. And I knew at that point enough that I didn't think there was ever a chance in hell I was going to come back. But again, I told him, honestly, if this is the truth, and he was very nice about it. He
was
gave
this the same stake president who was black?
He's great. We love him. He's really great.
President.
He's still the stake president in our area. Yeah. He's a great guy.
And then. And so that was.
So he handled that okay. But you basically resigned as a stake high councilman?
Yeah. So the funny thing was, though, is that they took several months to replace him. But Jeff was like, I'm done. I'm not traveling. I'm not doing any of my responsibilities. So they took him. It took till October. So this was in the summer. So Jeff was still technically on the high council until October. And we were like moving. This is jumping ahead, but we had already like moved full into like our ex-Mormon life. So we're like drinking and we're like we have a coffee maker and we're just like fully, but I'm like, Jeff, you're still on the high council technically. Like it just was like a funny thing, but it just took them a little while. So
one interesting thing from that. So when I met with the stake president and, I'm giving him the Cliff Notes version of all of these things I've been thinking about and going through. And the first thing he said was, well, when was the last time you felt the Spirit? And this is an interesting thing for me because I really had this idea of what the Spirit was. And as Larissa and I were deconstructing through this, I felt like we felt
The same thing that we had identified as the Spirit.
That we had identified as the Spirit, that we thought was letting us know the Book of Mormon was true as we were connecting. And during COVID, I felt like I had so many special experiences with patients because it was a stressful time for people. And a lot of, when I'm seeing these older patients and they're kind of don't have contact and they're really struggling and I'm having these special experiences with them. There's nothing about the church, but I'm feeling that same thing. And I start to realize, no, this is human connection. And so when he said, when was the last time you felt the Spirit? And I'm sure he thought that, months, it's been months ago. But I'm like, no, I'm feeling it more right now than ever. And I'm sure, and this isn't him. I know this is just what you think when you're in the church is that's not the Spirit. You're being deceived, but it's so funny to me because, well, what about the people that are saying that the vaccine, like the Spirit's telling them not to get the vaccine, we don't call them out or not, but it's just so the Spirit's such a funny thing in the church that as long as it affirms what the prophets say, then yes, that's the Spirit. But if it doesn't affirm what the prophets say, oh no, that's not the Spirit. That's not the Spirit. That must be something else. So that was an interesting thing to go through.
Yeah. Anytime there's an epistemology problem within Mormonism, which is the study of how we believe things, because anytime you feel good about something, that's the Holy Ghost. Yeah. But who doesn't make decisions based on how they feel about things? Everybody does. Yeah. So everybody can claim that it's the Holy Ghost, and everybody can point at the other guy who has a different decision or a different conclusion and say, well, that's the adversary. Yeah. And how do we know? Feelings do not equate truth. Yeah. And that's true for Muslims and the FLDS church and cult leaders and the Mormon church.
Yeah. And it's hard because I think in the church that they create a narrative around your feelings, because you'll be feeling connection or you'll be hearing beautiful music that touches you. And the church kind of almost appropriates your feelings and tells you that means the church is true. So it's, and this is where we start kind of feeling like, should we even be sending our kids to church? So Jeff is kind of ready to take the deep dive and go and leave. But I was still like, I don't know. And is it going to be disruptive for our kids? And I don't feel totally sure yet because I haven't done the history deep dive yet. And I'm still in the Taylor Petrie book. And but I was still just kind of I don't know. And our kids are our daughter went to girls camp that summer and had a great time. And so we start, but understanding that about how the church kind of co-ops your feelings and then tells you a narrative around it. I think that is when we started saying no, this might even be dangerous to have our kids be in this setting because they're getting this type of messaging that is not what we believe, or it's not true. So, yeah. So before I fully go through my complete faith crisis, I get a new calling to teach gospel doctrine in my ward. Yes, this is the summer, and I probably shouldn't have said yes, but I genuinely was no, I think it'll be really good because I know that people are struggling in the church.
And this was a little before.
This was maybe in the springtime. So I wasn't in a full gone through. Yeah, I wasn't in a full faith crisis yet, but we had already been to therapy. We had already identified that there were major issues. I was going through the Taylor Petrie book. So my bishop talks to me and he's like, hey, do you want to teach gospel doctrine? And I hadn't had a calling for a little bit because of my cancer treatment. So I was like, can I do, and it's doctrine and covenants. That's what the lessons are. And I was kind of like, could I do that? But at the time I was like, no, I know people are struggling and we want to have these conversations. This is what the church needs. So I'm still feeling very positive. No, let's talk about this. So I thought, you know what, maybe this will be a really good way to approach some of these hard topics in the church and we can have a conversation about them. And I think it'll be really good for everybody. So I said yes. And, but I'm in this place where we're starting to understand that there were certain things not said. And so I kind of start using Sunday school as a way to kind of just work through some of these questions. Mm-hmm. And I can't go there with the Come Follow Me manual because it's so correlated and, it's so whitewashed. And so I was like, I need to find some other sources that maybe have like some real information. And so I'm like searching online and I found the website LDS Discussions. so I don't know anything about LDS Discussions. And I hope Mike hears this and thinks this is funny, because I used LDS Discussions to plan my gospel doctrine lessons. And I did not say anything that was like super problematic, but I was looking through these and I was like, oh yeah, he breaks down, he breaks down the church's word of wisdom video. You know, their little now you know,
yeah,
like
we've done an episode.
Yeah.
On
Did
that.
you do it? Yeah. So I was doing a word of wisdom lesson and I call this my swan song, because I feel
I think this was our second to last week that we went.
So I had taught a few lessons. Like I taught one lesson and it was about the temple, because I think I was teaching about the 3 degrees of glory. And so I was kind of just saying like, hey, are we all okay that so few people will have access to LDS temple? So I really was not trying at all to be combative or problematic.
Just talk about stuff.
I was like, let's just
talk about stuff. So what could go wrong? What could go wrong? Let's just talk openly. And
yeah, and you know what? Maybe I was kind of being like a little bit devil's advocate. I don't know. But so I was like, are we all okay with this? And the funny thing though is that I feel like we had really good discussions. Like there were a lot of people that were like, yeah, I don't like this, or like, this makes me feel sad. And like, what about those people that are really good? They can't get into heaven. And so we're having really good discussions, and I'm getting like text messages and people are saying like, I love Sunday
Best
school.
lesson ever.
I love Sunday school. But you've also got like 5 people complaining about me
Lining
to the
up
bishop.
at the bishop's
yes,
office.
They were,
Yep. So we've got like people complaining
You've heard
about
this
me.
before, sounds like.
I did it. They taught me. They had me teach Elder Score for 3 months or 3 years.
Yes.
3 years. And it
my
was like
gosh.
a third loved it, a third were asleep, and a third were complaining to the bishop.
Yes, that was 100% it. Yeah. So this is my experience, but so I taught a lesson on the word of wisdom, and I feel like it was I call this my swan song in the church. I was standing up there wearing my pants, and I had used LDS Discussions to prepare for it. And so we were just talking about the word of wisdom. So I just like broke it down. Like I'm writing on the board and I'm like, okay, so these things you can't get a temple recommend for. But like these things, why do we just ignore this? You know, like there's parts of the word of wisdom that we don't even talk about or acknowledge or.
So like if you don't eat meat sparingly and in times of winter or famine, if you eat meat regularly, you can still go to the temple.
Yes.
But if you drink cold coffee, which isn't forbidden by the word of wisdom, because the word of wisdom only prohibits hot drinks and doesn't actually mention coffee or tea.
Yeah.
Then you're kept out of the temple. Right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm breaking this down and I'm there's also a part in the word of wisdom that says like barley is okay for drinks. And so I was like,
drinks of mild barley, which is beer. So the word of wisdom allows beer.
so I'm teaching gospel doctrine and I'm like, beer is okay. I'm just telling you that in the scriptures, it says that beer is okay. So we're having this robust discussion and Jeff is there and Jeff has always been like Mr. High Counselor in the church. So he can't even engage. He's just sitting there.
I was
just
there
like,
totally to support Larissa and really, it was like such a perfect moment. She's up there in her pants, and we didn't realize
this is where I peaked.
There was another couple in the word, and we didn't know they were going through a faith crisis too. So they start talking, and he starts saying, I drink 2 Monsters in the morning. Is that really healthier than if I just drank coffee? And I'm like, no, it's not. and then there's a new member there who's saying that part of her devotion in the morning is she reads her Bible as she drinks coffee. And so she's like, yes, thank you. Like, I feel like that's part of my morning devotion. And so we're making the, I mean, it was like chef's kiss, that lesson.
So I felt like the word of wisdom is kind of just, it's almost just like stupid, or we talk about it and we're just like, whatever. But I felt like it was the perfect venue to really talk about like, what's our relationship to like the leadership? Do we just obey blindly or do we think through this? So we're having this full discussion. Yeah. And there's the woman that was talking, she was investigating. So we've got somebody who's looking into joining, and she was like, yeah, I have like my morning coffee and I read my Bible every morning. And she was like, so is that wrong? And I like look at the class and I'm like, are we going to tell her this is wrong? And everybody was like, no. So kind of the consensus of the class at the end was just like, coffee is okay.
And then, of course, like 5 feet, probably more than 5 that day, that they didn't talk during the lesson, but they went straight to the bishop.
So after that, maybe like a day or two after that, a member of the bishopric called me, and he was like, how you doing? I was like, okay. I was like, look, I'm just going to be straight with you. I was like, Jeff and I are going through something. And I was like, we are deconstructing. Like, we are trying to figure out like what we believe that the church teaches and what is not. And he was like, well, you still believe that he was like, yeah, I understand. Like, there's certain things that maybe people have to let go of, but he goes, you still think that it's like the best place to like be and raise your family, right? And I said, I actually don't know. I don't know. I can't say that is the case. And so he was kind of like, well, do you feel like you can teach? And I was like, well, this is how I have to teach. This is the only way that I can do this. I said, I know that we're going to get to the end of the year and there's D&C 132. And I was like, and I will tell you that I've come to the place in my life where I believe that polygamy is wrong. It's based on women as a commodity and men acquiring commodities. So I was just like, I can't do it. And I do not believe the church's like apologetic response to polygamy. And so he was like, okay, maybe we could get somebody else to teach that week. But like, do you feel like this is okay? And I was like, well, if you're okay with like what I'm doing, then I can do this for like a little bit. And he was kind of like, okay. So then I taught the next week. And then after that, he called me again and he was like, hey, let's start going through your lessons before you teach. And then I was kind of like, I'm being managed. Like I can tell I'm being managed now. So around this same time, this is kind of where I do feel like this was an important experience for me because I feel like it's where I really like completed my arc of like always trying to be someone in the church and always trying to be like palatable for everybody else. And I just was so like, I'm going to say the thing and do my thing. And it felt actually really, really authentic to me. But because I knew that like, now I'm not trying to be Miss Relief Society president. Now I'm just going to be me. But it felt so liberating. And I felt like it was a good exit from the church for me.
And it was around this time that Larissa still hadn't, I think she was teetering. I don't remember where it fell in the thing, but she was teetering. And I had listened to Shannon Montez, her story. She did the ones with B.H. Roberts, which were excellent too, but this was her own story. When I listened to it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like Larissa needs to listen to this. And so
Shannon, in her interview, Shannon talks about feeling secondary to her spouse, feeling invisible in the church, giving up, sacrificing all of these things so that she could be a mom, but her husband got to be a dad and he didn't have to sacrifice things. And so I think Jeff knew that I would relate to this. So Jeff was like, I really think you should listen to this Mormon Stories podcast. And I was kind of like, I don't know. Is it just people being really negative? And like, do they all have an axe to grind? Because I had heard things about Mormon Stories. So one day I took my daughter, she rode horses, like she did like horse competitions. So I was at this competition with her all day and she doesn't ride that much. And so I knew I had the whole day and Jeff had texted it to me. So I'm just sitting like with my AirPods in out at the horse paddock or whatever. And I'm sitting there all day listening to her Mormon story. And it was almost just, it affected me so, I just wasn't prepared.
What was it? What were some of the things that affected you?
I just related so hard to her experience just as a Mormon woman and the messaging that she got when she was younger. I just related so hard to it. And it really kind of messed up my brain because I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting like to feel so connected to what she was saying, like she was telling my story. And then eventually like she goes back to school and like she's getting her master's degree. And so it just hit me so hard. But while she's talking too, she also like breaks down like some of like her beliefs, like, I don't know. And it was making me laugh because she's funny and interesting, but it was also, what was she saying?
There's this point where her husband is saying, but what if it's true? And she said, oh, it's not true. And then she starts bringing up Ammon cutting off the arms and like what that would entail of him like
she was like, you have to resharpen your sword every
arms,
time.
Yeah, and resharpening the sword between each one. And I mean, she just went through and had these explanations for things that she said, trust me, it's not true. And it was really I mean, it was so good. The whole episode was so great. But
so I think me relating to her and then her bringing up some of these like problematic things in the church, I think these are things I hadn't thought of. And so then I was like, oh yeah, that is weird. Yeah. Why do we believe that? Or why do we think that Nephi could have built that boat and like gone and done this thing? So I think the fact that she also pointed out these things, it gave me kind of like the push to say, yeah, like, let's start digging in, because I think that we had enough just with like our relationship issues and with the social issues of the church. I think that's enough. That was enough for us to really have significant issue with the church. We don't feel like we left because of church history. We feel like the church history was the nail in the coffin. Would you say that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that was the thing that made us really be able to let go and just say it's not true. It's not true. So after Shannon Montez, then I think after that I was listening to like the Robert Rittner one because Jeff had said that was good. The Christine Jepson Clark one.
Yeah, that one was excellent.
That one was
too.
Really good.
That's one of the most viewed of all time.
It's so good.
Even though there's no video.
Yeah.
We'll include a link to that because that's a good one.
Was so good. And when she talks about her paradigm shift, being in the choir and being with the gay member of the choir that changed her view on that was so profound to me. I mean, and then the other thing that was so profound, it was her son that went through the operation, right, and was saved, and there was the other little boy in there, and she said it's because he got a blessing, and the other little boy was in there, and he got a blessing, and she went back the next time to follow up, and she said, oh, how's he doing? And they said, oh, he died, and it's like, okay, well, why do blessings work sometimes or not other times? I mean, those are really hard things to square with, but yeah, so those were things that were really
and I think once we started like fully looking into every single thing, because I started breaking down like, do I believe in this principle? And I had this one moment where I was thinking about priesthood blessings because those have always been special, and Jeff has given our kids priesthood blessings, and I don't know why this had never occurred to me before, but like one time I'm just thinking and I thought, does God honor like Jeff's prayer more than my prayer? Like, why would he honor Jeff's prayer over our kids more than like my prayer over our kids? Like, I'm their mom. And so, like even some of these things that we think are special in the church, we don't realize that that's problematic. Or like my neighbor who's a good dad, but not a member of the church, God listens to his prayer less than Jeff's prayer because Jeff has the priesthood. So we started just kind of deconstructing and breaking down every piece of what we believed. And we found that there was very, very little left. And I've heard you say this, John, that like, what's the thing? Like what's unique to the church is usually the problematic stuff. And the thing that are more universal, that's the stuff that you want to keep.
I mean, I've heard several people say this. I don't even know who to attribute to. Yeah. But it's like none of the good in Mormonism is unique. And all of the,
all of the unique things aren't very good.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So, because we're thinking like, do we believe in tithing? And I'm like, yeah, I believe in like charitable giving and like, to causes that you care for. And so like there are, but you can do that. You don't have to do that within the church. And so, yeah, it very quickly like all kind of came falling down. And then So because of kind of who we were and the relationships we had in the church, we felt like we had to make a very distinct break. And so Jeff had talked to the stake president, and then I felt like we needed to talk to our bishop because I had worked with him as Relief Society president, and I did not want him to think that I felt unsupported, and I had had a very good experience with him. And so we told him that we needed him to talk to him and for him to come over to our house. And I think that he thought that we were getting divorced because he came in and it was like kind of tense. And then after we like laid it all out for him, he was like, oh, I think it would have been, that would have been more likely for you guys to get divorced than for me to like, he was like blown away. It was just, we just weren't, I just think we were like those people in the church that you wouldn't think this would happen to. And so we like blindsided him. So we had like a talk with him. There were a few other like leadership people that wanted to talk to us. And so we kind of like did this thing. And then after that, we started talking to our kids about it, and then kind of started making the process of like fully kind of extricating ourselves from the church.
So you guys did the full deconstruction.
Yeah.
And the free fall.
Yeah. And it just took a few months, surprisingly.
And thank goodness we had each other through that, because that is not a fun thing. And you know, we had this person I talked about earlier that was in our bishopric. He was the executive secretary. We rekindled your relationship with them, and then that other couple in the Word of Wisdom class that we didn't know was going through a deconstruction. So now there's a group of 4 of us. They ended up
leaving at the same time as us,
and it's been really helpful to have a group who, you know, when you have that Mormon foundation, it's so interesting. But being together and just deconstructing together, and it's been really helpful and therapeutic to have people.
So where did you both come out on the church's truthfulness and the truth claims, if you had to summarize the conclusion of your deconstruction?
Oh, I mean, I think that I was fully like, this is the making of Joseph Smith.
What is?
The churches. Like, this was created by Joseph Smith. And I think that I think the first thing that I fully lost my faith in was like priesthood authority, and that anybody can tell me, you know, what God is saying. And, you know, as I'm learning about like patriarchy or about, you know, these types of structures, one thing that I have learned is that, people who are marginalized, or who, you know, like if you've been oppressed, or if you know, haven't had opportunities, it actually gives you like more insight, right? Because you've had experiences and gone through hard things. And so, you know, I grew up thinking that the church leaders, they knew all these things and that they could talk to God. And I came to the point where I was like, no, I think that I probably know better than you, because of my experience. I'm a woman of color. You know, I'm a woman in the church. I grew up poor. Like, these are all things. And the men who are leading the church have lived fairly privileged lives, and they were put in church leadership early. And, you know, we all love Uchtdorf, but Uchtdorf is a refugee. And so, like, this is probably why we love him, is because he has a different viewpoint. But there's so many people in church leadership that I think have a very, very privileged viewpoint. And I think it actually makes it so that they can even understand less about the world and how it works than I do. And so that was the first thing. I think that was one of the major parts of my testimony that absolutely crumbled. And I knew that I couldn't sit in a Temple Recommend interview and say, like, yes, I sustain them as prophets, seers, and revelators, because I completely did not believe that was true.
Okay.
And I mean, when it came down for me, I think it all came down. I still think Joseph Smith is such a fascinating person. I mean, and I can't remember where I was listening, but they were talking about Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow, and they were saying I think they're asking a psychologist, this might've been on your thing, and said, what is it that they were seeking for? Like, psychologically, what was it? And they said they wanted to be special. They wanted to be more special. And Joseph Smith, right? He was a simple farm boy, run of the mill. And I think he always wanted to be special. And it's amazing what he did. I mean, I mean, to cobble all of these things from different places and to bring them together the way they did. I mean, it's amazing. I think that if he wouldn't have been murdered, I think that it would have imploded on itself, because I just think that he was, I think you were seeing the makings of like a Warren Jeffs type situation. But luckily, I think for him and for the church, he ended before that could happen. And I think that gave Mormonism a path forward. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's what I think. But he still is a fascinating person. But I don't believe, I mean, there's no way I believe any of the truth claims of the church at this point.
So lightning round. So the God came to Joseph in the first vision. Your response would be?
Absolutely not.
Why?
I don't believe it. I think there was too many people at the time that were having experiences like that. We didn't hear him talk about it for years afterwards. The first account didn't have God and Jesus. I mean, that's just too many holes.
Okay, and Angel Moroni.
No, you're fine. Yeah.
Angel Moroni delivers golden plates, and the Book of Mormon is translated. I mean, so many people are like, well, you may struggle with race issues or LGBT issues, but like, how do you explain the Book of Mormon, you know?
Well, the Book of Mormon is trickier, but you can still, I mean, there's no question it's fantastic in the way that it came together. I think we're told so often how special it is in the church that makes it special, because I think when people outside the church read it, they're like, no, that's weird. It doesn't feel that special or that divine, but we're told how special it is. But if God really wanted us to believe that he had an angel give golden plates to this young boy and translate it, why would you make so many holes and make it so hard to believe? And even the witnesses that you have didn't get to see it. They got to see it like a city through a hill. I mean, come on. It's just too many holes. That is just, to me, it's like, if God is really this sneaky, he's an asshole. I mean, really, I feel like if he makes it that hard to find his one truth, if he makes it that obscure to find his one truth, then something isn't adding up, or he's a trickster. And that doesn't make sense to me.
Book of Abraham?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think that once we kind of like broke down, like, Joseph Smith made it up, or, you know, he had source material. I think everything is just like, there's not a thing that we believe, you know. I think that, you know, like, we listened to all the things about what the Book of Abraham was, and, you know, he said it was something different, but now then they found the source material. And so, you know, like, these are all things that kind of fit together with like what Joseph Smith was building. And so, yeah, we don't believe any of it.
And so it was a translation, but now it's apparently a revelation. I mean, yeah. So just lots of holes in
polygamy.
Oh, I think it's awful. I mean, I really do. I think that, you know, the whole thing, I think, was Joseph Smith creating this world. And I mean, you look at Warren Jeffs, and I know people say that are in the church, it's so different. It wasn't that much different. It's just he didn't get that far down the path. I mean, it wasn't nice. And you don't send someone's husband
down the path.
He really did.
He got like 30 to 40 wives down the path.
Yeah.
But Warren Jeffs, I mean, making this into a ceremony in the temple with these young girls and people standing there. I mean, but were they headed there? Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how weird it was.
Right.
And then Joseph Smith sending men away and then marrying their wives or manipulating to marry their daughters. I mean, that is not, you can't tell me that God, with all of the things going wrong in the world and all the suffering in the world, he is so concerned that Joseph Smith send this man away so he can marry his wife. Come on, like, what kind of a God is that? That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
So
modern day prophets and one true church and priesthood authority.
Yeah. Nope.
No.
And no.
And you know, this is hard, because I told you when Lauren C. Dunn told us, I know God lives, I really believed that the prophets saw God. When I was on my mission, I believed that they actually met with God. And you remember Bruce R. McConkey's last testimony, and I would show that to investigators to like show them that we have a prophet, we have prophets who know God, they've seen him. So this is his church, and that's devastating to me. I feel like this was part of the thing that crumbled. And some people are like, well, you can't take it so literal. It's like, the church told us it was literal. Like, it makes me so upset, because I feel like they're trying to change the narrative on me. And it's like, no, you told me that's what it was. So now you're trying to tell me, well, you're taking it too literal. You can't believe that. It's like, no, you're the one that made me do that. So I get really, that's really hard for me. But I do not think. I think if you created a church that was led by 70 and 80 and 90-year-old white men, it would look like the Mormon church looks today. And it would move as slow as the Mormon church moves today. Yeah. And that's what we have.
So when people say, well, these modern day prophets talk and speak with God and Jesus, you're saying that's not true.
It's absolutely not true.
And how would you know?
Well,
or what makes you think?
You know, there was an interesting, because this is so funny. I feel like the apostles are catching themselves, because I think you played the conference of one of the apostles trying to infer that he is, or maybe this was on Mormon discussions. They were playing one of Mormon discussions, when they were playing one of the apostles who was giving a thing and talking about how they know they can't talk about the experience. They can't talk about the experience, but you can trust them that they know that, like, and that's just inferring that they're talking to God. But then they were pinning down, there was a guy who was talking to Elder Bednar in the airport a few weeks ago, and he had recorded the conversation. And Elder Bednar saying, no, that's church members misunderstanding that we talk to God. We're not special witnesses of Jesus Christ. We're special witnesses of the name of Christ. And it's like, oh my gosh, like, come on. Like, you just keep changing the narrative. Even today, they're changing it depending on who they're speaking to. And I don't like that. It's not honest. And again, it comes back to, you got to look yourself in the mirror and admit who you are and who you're not. And if you're not willing to do that, then you can't expect the members to do that. And I don't think they are.
And a church that's led by, if you were led by God, and this is something that I think really struck me in Shannon Montez's interview, is she was saying, why are we always behind? You know, like, why are we not leading the way? And this was kind
behind
of
in what?
I mean, leading the way in like, why are we not leading the way in like women's issues or LGBTQ or like human rights issues, civil rights? Yeah. Like, why are we always behind? Like, how come the civil rights was happening and people, Marky Peterson was saying that, you know, Martin Luther King was a communist, you know? And so I feel like we're always like 30 years behind. Like, why are we not leading the way on like teaching healthy sexuality? Why is the church always behind? And I think that's, for me, a clear indication. Like, our church, the messaging of our church is from people who came of age in the 1950s. It's like right in line with like the values and the morals and the ideas of the 1950s. And so that makes sense. And I think the church will probably like slowly evolve and change. But it's always just a little bit behind.
A lot behind
what everybody else is doing. And that's not what they were supposed to do. That was supposed to be the point of having a prophet, right? So that we could lead the way in like righteousness and morality. And maybe I have a different version of righteousness and morality than what the church believes, but obviously that means that there's not a place for me in the church, because my values and the things that I believe are right are things that the church is behind on.
And do you think it would be important for God to tell a prophet if the church's headquarters in Salt Lake City, that the Great Salt Lake drying up might be an issue? I mean, why am I hearing this for the first time from the New York Times this year?
Or John Larson on Mormon Stories.
Yeah.
Then hearing it from the prophets, seers, and revelators. I mean, to me, it's like it's chef's kiss of like just perfect of what are you seeing? What are you prophesying of? Because that would seem like something that would be important for us, for the church headquarters here in Salt Lake City to be aware of and to say, hey, we need to take some preemptive actions 20 years ago so that the Great Salt Lake doesn't dry up, because we see this being a potential catastrophe situation.
But then the church would have to have influence with the state legislature.
Right. That's too much.
Yeah.
You can't go there. They don't get involved in the politics, right? I forgot about that.
Oh, we just got a tiny bit cynical. Sorry, apologize. Okay. Oh. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you fully deconstructed.
Yes. Yeah.
And then, gone. You know, the other thing that's hard is, and maybe the most challenging thing when this all happens is wondering, well, what do we believe, especially with regard to the afterlife? You know, this idea that we're going to be together. Oh,
No. Well, okay. I totally want to get there. Margie's back. Hey, Margie. Hey. So glad you're back. And Margie, it's just in time because Margie's favorite part is the Reconstruction.
Okay. Yes.
I want to just drive one final nail home.
Yeah.
Larissa's, so much of your episode was about your feminist awakening.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, like, there are so many problems: the racism, the LGBT stuff, the lying about the history, the problematic history, the truth claims. Like, isn't it mind-blowing in 2022 that, like, in every other, imagine corporations that had a policy that women couldn't be in the executive leadership or on the board of directors, or schools where women couldn't be principals or vice principals. Isn't it mind-blowing that in a church that claims to be led by God and Jesus, that still in 2022, women, an entire gender, is completely disenfranchised from leadership, and nobody bats an eye.
Right.
And the women who are in it are probably more against women leadership than the men are. Isn't it just like blows the mind.
Well, this is why I feel like patriarchy is almost like the foundation of the church. And it's so ingrained that, I think that I think that we almost like aren't talking about it, or we don't see it enough. And patriarchy can only be perpetuated when women are complicit in this. Like we're a substantial enough group of people that we could be like, no, we fight against this. So it has to be perpetuated by women. But I think that the lack of representation of women in the church causes like so many issues, even on small levels, because you could never get away with this like any place else. And I know that they're just barely starting to put like the general women into certain committees, but they're only there for a couple of years. So you don't have a chance to really build something or really influence or create a legacy or anything like that. But one thing that's interesting to me is that I think that you can even see the small damages of not having women on high levels of the church, even in little things like female missionaries. So I think even more than 50% of the missionaries now are women. And, everybody gets the same amount of money for their every month.
Stipend.
Their stipend that they get every month. But women missionaries are going to have to they menstruate. And so they're going to have to buy pads and tampons, which are fairly expensive. And then you also have other issues like you might have a bleeding incident and you might need to buy more garments or something. And so like women have more expenses.
Or makeup.
Yes, and they're told that they should be wearing makeup, and so women have more expenses, but they're getting the same amount of money. And if there was ever a woman sitting in the missionary committee, and I listened to, is it Camille Johnson she was like an executive assistant for, and you interviewed her, and anyways.
Oh, for an executive assistant to one of the general authorities.
Yeah, and so she said that as of 2019, there is still not a woman on the missionary committee. So I know there are some women on missionary committees, but. So you're going to miss very, very important things about the woman's experience. And we've got all these women right now. We had that New York Times article about women, LDS women, and how they relate to their garments. And women are just like venting about how miserable they are. And it's because they're made by men for men. And so we are not even addressing like what the woman's experience is within the church. The church, I don't think, can even see it because it's not represented. So I think it's in small ways, but it's also in big ways. But it's so, for me, like once I started to understand the system and what it looks like, it just, for me, it went so deep that I was just like, no, I can't be a part of this. I can't participate. But it is frustrating because I think that it is so commonplace and normalized that that people don't see it. It happens, like it's just part of everyday life.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's outrageous. And
it is.
And people don't even really think about it.
Yeah.
It's like the patriarchy is the water we're swimming in.
Yeah,
nobody
really
even
is.
notices the water.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else you want to say about your deconstruction before we get to Margie's favorite part, which is the reconstruction?
I don't think so.
Do we want to share? So when we left the church, we spoke to all of our birth moms because that was a big deal.
I think this will be part of our reconstruction.
Okay.
Did you write the letter? Did you tell all the people in your ward, all the people in your stake, all your family members? How did you come out as leaving the church, or did you? Is this your coming out?
We didn't. So we knew that everybody in our stake would know. Like we were involved in so many like extra things. We knew that people would know, and so like we told our close friends, and then we met with certain leadership, and we were like, "Okay, we're out." And then we kind of like slowly told family members. So there's 8 kids in my family, and I'm the 6th to leave the church. And since my older sister also have left. So now there's 7 out of the 8 that have left the church. And Jeff has one sister that's kind of progressive and nuanced, and then one that's in the church, and then 2 have left. So we kind of like we have, a lot of our siblings have left the church. And so we kind of like told family as we kind of like got the courage to talk about it. My mom is still very, very hardcore in the church. So that was a difficult thing for her. But, so we started telling people, but yeah, so our birth moms are actually an interesting thing, an interesting part of our story because, we feel like they had placed their babies with us with an understanding that, they wanted their baby placed with an LDS couple and, somebody where the baby could be sealed. And so even though our birth moms weren't very active, we didn't know what impact this would have. And we didn't know if they would feel like we were breaking our part of the agreement of the adoption.
So was your faithfulness in the church an important part of why they chose you as parents for their kids?
I think we didn't really know. I mean, I think initially they were looking for an LDS couple and they wanted, they wanted their kids to be sealed to a family. And, they wanted, I know that like our son's birth mom, like his family had often been like, oh, like we're excited for Beck to go on a mission. And so we knew that there was some expectation that we were not fulfilling with us leaving the church. So, our youngest son, his name is Golden, and his birth mom, she had to find out first because right after we decided to leave, Golden turned 8. And we had prepped him that he was going to get baptized. And so he was gearing up for it, and he had gone to like the Great to Be 8 thing. And he was 6 years old when COVID happened. And so we didn't think that he was even equating baptism with the church, but he really wanted to be baptized because his big brother and sister had been baptized. And so all of our family had done it. And, Jeff had baptized them. So he was very invested in being baptized. So we were kind of in this, and then his birth mom had like bought plane tickets for like her and her fiance and her 3 girls to come out and be with us during Golden's baptism. So we knew that we kind of like had to tell her something because we were like, she's coming out here and we're not going to have a baptism. And so we actually, this is another like funny story about us leaving. So Golden was very invested in his baptism, but we just could not feel good about doing any type of thing. And so, but he wanted to be baptized. So we decided that we would do like a fake baptism.
So we took him to a swimming pool. Well, first I called Nicole, our birth mom.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how, I didn't know how it was going to go. I think I had I thought she'd be fine with it. But when I told her and she was like, oh, thank goodness. She's like, I'm actually really glad. She was like relieved. But
Relieved what?
That we had left
because she knew of the issues it had caused her. She had recognized these.
So we didn't know this, but she had fully deconstructed as well. So she had like gone through a thing, but we didn't know.
So that was quite nice to have that conversation and her to feel, she didn't know we were going through anything. So we could really have this.
Okay. So one of the birth moms had left the church.
Yeah. So she came out and we went to our friends had a swimming pool. And so we got Golden in his little baptism clothes and we
baptized him to be a follower of Jesus.
So Jeff just said, like, I baptized you to be a follower of Jesus. Yeah, to follow the principles of Jesus. And then he like dunked him. And at this point, Golden is just like, yep, I was baptized.
He has no idea. Yeah, he has no idea.
Because he wanted to be baptized, but we were like, we can't do like a church one. So I don't know if this is going to get us in trouble, but we did a fake baptism. So
it's not fake.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, why is it not fake? Yeah.
You did your own baptism.
It was our
We're doing
baptism.
It our way now.
Yeah.
We're doing it our way.
So I actually want to.
It's probably more real, actually.
Yeah, maybe. So Golden's birth mom actually wrote down something for me, and I actually just want to read it on here because after we found out that she had deconstructed, we were talking to her, and I was noticing like that I actually felt like there was less hierarchy in our relationship with our birth moms as well. Like with her, once we'd kind of broken down this thing, like we're not the super righteous people. Now we all left the church, so now we're kind of like equals in this. And so I had felt like we were on a more like equal basis with her, and it was really interesting. It made me feel like I could be even closer with her, and that we could connect, and that we were really, really better team members, like as people who loved this child. And so I just asked her, I was like, hey, I'm really interested in your experience. So she actually wrote something down for me about her experience placing and then how this affected our relationship. So yeah, is this okay if I read this just for a second? So this is from our youngest son's birth mom. She says, and this is going to be emotional for me. She says, one word that comes to mind when I think of my experience With placing Golden for adoption in the church is just shame. I got divorced and I had 3 kids, so I couldn't fit in the singles ward since I was damaged goods. And being in a family ward, I didn't connect with people because women don't know how to befriend me because they didn't have the double date excuse. So she had gotten married and had 3 kids and then was divorced. And then she got pregnant with Golden and placed Golden. So she has 3 girls from a previous marriage.
Oh, wow.
Religion ties deeply with my OCD. So for the most part, I wasn't a huge believer in the LDS church, but I was afraid to question it or explore other ideas. And I felt I had to go for my children's safety. When I was pregnant and I went through everything and decided on adoption, I went from being pitied as a young single mom to being viewed like a dumb girl that got what she deserved. I was pitied by all the church members, and I was never respected, just a woman adding more damaged goods to her pile. I too felt like I deserved to suffer because I should have known better since I had been through the temple. No one tried to connect with me as a human. It was just an obligation to ask me how I'm doing. It was a big turning point for me when I talked to my bishop during my pregnancy, and after I had decided to place the baby for adoption, he never checked to see if I needed counseling or how my mental health or emotional needs were met. He instead got his Book of Mormon and turned to different verses and said it was time for me to begin the repentance process because premarital sex is a sin as terrible as murder in God's eyes. After time had passed and Golden was born, my biggest fear and driving factor to remain in the church was so that God would keep my girls safe. And I worried that if I would show that I didn't learn my lesson, that the Kindreds would worry that I was becoming a bad person and would not let Golden have a relationship with me, so he wouldn't be tempted to fall away from the church. I found myself worrying constantly about how I looked to everybody around me and having to explain and I needed to explain my past in order to show that I am worthy to eat a damn piece of bread and a little shot of water every Sunday. It was exhausting when I finally began my process of completely removing myself from the church, and I had to do it in stages, and I found that I was hiding from a lot of people. There were people closest to me that I was terrified of telling. There are still people I haven't told because I know that they will disown me. The Kindreds were the ones I was so scared to talk to about leaving the church because I didn't want to let them down. It's a hard process to differentiate what my personal beliefs were and what has been ingrained in me my whole life because of the LDS culture. It's an ongoing process as well, and probably will be for a long time. And then she says, I feel like I connect with the Kindreds on such a deeper level now because of all the weird imaginary boundaries that we were supposed to follow in the church have been removed, and we can really talk as humans that respect one another. Anyway, so she sent this to me, and I wanted to read this because it just is so heartbreaking to me that she felt like if she left the church, maybe we wouldn't let her be with Golden anymore. We wouldn't let her see Golden or have access to him. And it breaks my heart, but at the same time, that it's reasonable. That's like a reasonable concern for her. And so when we look at our deconstruction of the church and realizing how it had harmed our relationship, I think as we started to let our birth moms know, I think that we also realized that it had created hierarchy and separation in our other relationships as well, and had kept us from connecting because we were kind of like the righteous people that we had our lives together. So you can give your baby to us. And it was just it's been so beautiful to talk to our birth moms and to discuss this with them and just be on the same level with them and just say like, we're doing this. We made this agreement together, and we're just all about these kids, and we're not better than you. We're just all in it together, and things are just more equal now. And
I feel like the hierarchy is something that is just so ingrained in the church too, right? We're always placing ourselves somewhere in this thing. And Joseph Smith made it, even heaven's like that, where we have degrees in heaven, right? And there's degrees within the degrees in heaven. I mean, It's just hierarchical, and it's not healthy.
And Jeff, you're obviously feeling emotional. Do you want to share what you're feeling? Just on a feeling level?
It's just really heartbreaking to hear that and to know that, again, these, she said, imaginary boundaries. It's these things that the church tells us are so important, and and you remove those, you think your life's going to like fall apart. And it's like, oh my gosh, it takes so much pressure and so much of these weird things that it's created out. And then you can just be real and nice and not have to be judging others. I've noticed that so much in the things I do that that I just feel like I was so judgmental of so many things, and it's so nice not to have to feel like that anymore. And I still catch myself. I mean, and even with members, I have to try and, because it gets easy to judge members, and I have to catch myself.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Thank you so much for reading that.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
As you were reading it, I was thinking about how true it is that as we kind of deconstruct, we feel oftentimes like a barrier has been removed that allows us to kind of, and as you were talking, Jeff, about that hierarchy in relationship, it's in marriage too. So the same thing that happens with your spouse, it happens with your kids too. You have this sense of like, and what happens like when you deconstruct and you see this divide that has existed through roles or, whatever, kind of makes up the hierarchy. But just, it's a new day. It's a new day, I think, for many of us in our marriages then, with our kids, with friends who are not members, with, where you're able to kind of really deeply feel for and connect on a new level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing, and thank you to the birth mom.
Yeah.
I'm sure she knows you were going to read that.
I wanted her words to be said because these girls have a really powerful experience that they've gone through, and it's so sad. When we talk about hierarchy, like she's a woman who got pregnant out of wedlock and is completely shamed for it, but then she places her baby, which as we were talking before, like, it is so incredibly Christ-like to go through this thing and to be hurting and to have pain and to sacrifice your body so that your child can be raised by somebody else. And I just cannot get over this bishop of hers sitting down and telling her that, like, now you got to work through repentance. Like, that bishop could never do what she had done. He couldn't do what she had done. Yeah. These women should be put up on a pedestal, but they're just being shamed in the church. And anyways, and so, I feel like this was part of one of the really nice parts of us leaving and rebuilding is that we've seen that, like you said, this hierarchy taken out of relationships, and we're just able to connect more as human beings on a better level.
Yeah, beautiful. Really quickly, one of the, the fact that, Jeff, you would served 7 years in bishoprics or more and in stake high councils, young men's presidencies, worked with the youth. The fact you, Larissa, had served in Relief Society presidencies and probably young women's presidencies. One of the most difficult things to hear is just once the wards and stakes that you served for so long find out you've left the church, just what happens to those relationships is I guess it hasn't been super long, but can you share how this has affected your friendships and social circles, there in Nashville?
I do think it's really, really hard, especially when you've given so much to the church. And, we mentioned this, like, kind of when we were talking about how we were kind of on the hamster wheel, but we were like a Ma and Pa trek. And I DJ the stake dances. So I'm DJing the dances, and like we're doing the things, and then like I'm making t-shirts for the youth council, and like we're not just doing our callings, we literally are doing what they told us to do in the temple. We are literally giving everything to the church, and it's just so shocking that when you leave, it's like it never mattered. It doesn't matter because and there's some people that are good and genuine and kind. But it's amazing, the silence. It's so deafening, that it's just like no one is talking to me. Why? Did it not matter? Like, it didn't matter, like, what we gave. It really feels like that. And it does change relationships, which is really hard because there are some relationships where I was like, no, it's fine. Like, we got this, like, we're going to make it through. And then but it isn't fine, like it really does. It changes relationships. And I think that once you're in something together and somebody leaves, it can feel invalidating to those that stayed. And that's something that I feel like I've experienced with my friends is that, like it feels, I think it probably feels threatening to them that we left. And so there's things now that we can't talk about anymore. But it is so hard to feel that just like you're cut off from this.
Jeff?
And we've had, and we have a few friends who have responded really, really well. And still we stay in contact. One of the guys I cycle with, who was our former stake president, and him and his wife have been just so normal about it, which is nice. But I think it's awkward. And I will give grace to the people out of the church, because it's hard. This is a foundation that you share together. And once that foundation is gone, you wonder, like, what do we say? Where do we, and it's awkward for me as it is for them, I'm sure, because those are things that used to be easy to connect about, things, but now I don't know, they don't know where I stand. So it's really, I mean, everything has to be superficial, and it's kind of easier that way, right? Or you just don't talk. And so I don't know if I blame a lot of people. I mean, one person that I was pretty close with, and I told him, and I said, hey, this was the Sunday, said, were you traveling today on the High Council? And I said, oh no, actually we've been going through a lot, and I've actually decided to step away. And he's like, I actually was wondering if you were going through some things. That was it. Never another question since then. And again, I don't blame him.
I think a lot of times people don't know what to say. So I don't think anyone's trying to be harsh. And the church has created a narrative around people that leave that isn't very nice. And so I think it makes it so that people don't know what to say. Yes. And so I don't really blame the members, and I don't think that it's because they're terrible people and they just cut us out. Yeah. But it's like, we don't know how to handle it. We don't know how to talk about it. And so it just makes it so that you do feel cut off.
But again, you have to ask yourself, why would it be such a huge deal to leave a church? When I talk to people at work and I'm like, oh yeah, I left my church. Like, oh, do you want to come to ours? It's no big deal to leave a church. But I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, you don't get it. Like, this is like, it makes every decision you make on a daily basis is influenced by this. And so it's so much different. And why? The church why is it such a huge deal when someone leaves a church? And why do we create this narrative that even this past conference, I mean, several talks about people who leave the church and they weren't willing to do this or they weren't willing to do that. I mean, come on. That's not going to help. So I blame the institution, not the people.
Right.
I have a quick question around the deconstruction kind of process and what you felt. What if you had to describe your experience around sort of this deconstruct? And I know your time periods are a little bit different, right? Mm-hmm. But just whatever emotions came up for you. I'm curious what it felt like.
For me, I would say reeling, like loss of foundation, like almost like in this place of you don't say free fall, but like you don't feel like that foundation that was always there is there. The interesting thing about it, and someone said this, it feels like you're hanging by this tree, and then you let go of the tree, and like, oh, there's the ground. It is there, and it seems so scary to let go. And then once you are willing to let go, it wasn't as scary as I thought it was going to be. Like the process was disorienting, I think, for sure.
Yeah, that's a good word, disorienting. So I feel like for me, I feel like there were parts of my deconstruction that were very liberating, because I feel like I was trying to align, because I think I had really tried to develop what are my personal values and what do I think is right, what are my beliefs, and then does the church align with this or does it not align with this? And so for part of me, it was liberating, but I also feel like the summer that we were really, really digging in and getting into church history, I felt like I was in an existential crisis, because I was really like, what is real and what do we believe? Yeah. And I went through a very sad little while where I was like really upset, because I was like, we're not going to be together. Like, maybe we're not going to be together forever. Like I don't even know. I don't know if there's an afterlife anymore. That was something that was really hard for me. Mm-hmm. And I also went through, I think this was a long time, is that for a little while I was like, is everything that I've done up to this point in my life, did it matter? You know, like I worked so hard for something that now I'm finding out isn't what I thought it was. And now it really made me feel like, is my life been just a joke up to this point? And I really had to get to the place, and I think this is where we start talking about reconstruction, is I had to get to the place where I was like, no, I had good relationships. Like I did connect with people. And even if maybe I wasn't in a place that I think is good now, I did think it was a good place at the time. So I think that there's value to that because I was trying my best with what I knew. And you know, now I know better. And so now I'm going to try to do better in a different way. But it's very hard to square with your life and to say, I have put so much time and effort into something, and to even question and say, did I damage other people? I know I contributed to some of the messaging that isn't healthy. So I know that I was like complicit in this. And those are really hard things to kind of like deal with about your life.
Yeah. It reminds me of that word reckoning.
Yes.
It's that reckoning as you kind of sort through.
Oh, yeah.
It's so real.
It's heavy.
So can I really quickly, I'm really interested again in this deconstruction part. If I name, oftentimes I've talked about, the deconstruction process with like how it impacts towers, like different parts of our lives. An example would be like how we perceive our own identity, our sense of purpose, who we are, right? Or relationships, or our marriage, or existential kind of things of like, you know, where do we go? You know, what does it mean? What does it all mean? And grief and loss. So if I go through each, will you just tell me which ones you actually felt were impacted during your deconstruction? Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. And another one is sort of this sense of self-trust too. For many people, that's deeply impacted. Like, how do I trust myself? How did I miss that? How did I miss all these things, right?
Yeah.
And kind of that's another tower that has to be rebuilt. But what if we started with kind of identity, this sense of how, you know, who you are, what's your sense of purpose, what brings you alive? Did it impact both of you? And if so, how? What was your relationship with how it impacted that, if it did?
Impacted identity?
Identity.
So I think for me, this may have been like a bigger thing for you, because I think for me, I felt like I was kind of like self-betraying in the church for a very long time because I was kind of shoving it down. So I actually feel like I almost had a new sense of like that I can really embrace my identity, and I can, whatever my thing is, I can do that. Because now I wasn't constrained, you know, by feeling like I needed to be a certain thing in the church. And I know that not everybody is trying to go that hard in the church like I was, but that was a big thing. So for me, I feel like it was almost a place where I could really embrace my identity that I kind of had been kind of fleshing out and building the last couple of years. And so for me, I don't necessarily feel like there was any real loss of identity for me. It was almost kind of like a real embracing and finding of like, this is who I am.
Yes.
And I would say mine's similar. I think,
Can I just say that's profound? It's not you lose your identity.
Yeah.
You discover your identity through this process, because the whole time the church has been trying to, not intentionally, but the effects of the church's indoctrination is to keep you from ever listening to yourself, paying attention to yourself, and discovering your identity.
Yeah.
It removes the obstruction.
Yes.
Like you're trying to see yourself, and there's all this cloudy film that when you deconstruct, it's like, I have clear view.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah.
And I think too, it was so interesting making decisions after I had left, because my first instinct every time I think, wait a minute, is that Mormon Jeff or is that me?
Yeah.
You know, is it a decision? Is that a decision that I want to make, or is that the decision that I would have made when I was a member of the church because the church made that decision for me? And that was really interesting. And I caught myself every day asking myself, wait a minute, why am I feeling like this? Is this my Mormon conditioning, or is this really me feeling like this for a reason? And
real.
So I think that was helpful for me, and it was helpful. I think it was helpful for me on lots of levels. I feel like my relationships, even with people at work, have been better because I don't feel like I am higher or better or know more or have the truth. I mean, I think all those things are really damaging to relationships and to ourselves.
Yeah.
So, babe, do you feel like you had any issues with like, I'm not high counsel Jeff anymore? Like, did you have any things where you're like, oh, I'm not as special as I thought I was?
But I don't, surprisingly, I don't feel like I was actually thinking about that because I'm like, I think that was always a big thing when you're in the church because that's how you got validation. Mm-hmm. But I haven't felt that sense of loss in that way. And maybe I'm not recognizing it but I don't feel like that. I don't feel like I do.
What about the sense of identity? I feel like you had kind of described your relationship with your mom. And I know you guys moved away and, but was there any hit or anything that came up around kind of being Nephi or the chosen one or sort of did anything come up with you on the backside with regard to, all those years of what love looked like with you in your family life and your mom in particular?
Sorry.
Yeah.
So Jeff actually lost both of his parents in the years, let's see, one right before COVID and then one during COVID. So he had lost both of his parents. And as we were kind of doing our deconstruction, this is something that I was wondering. I was like, would this be different if your parents were alive? Because Jeff had always kind of been the golden boy. Yes. And so yeah, this is something that I feel like I question. I have this question a lot is like, how would this have affected you? Because it's kind of easy. It makes it easier that his parents weren't around to see this. Yeah. Because I think it would have been devastating for your parents.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think about that too. Sorry about my choking fit, by the way.
No, okay. He's a little cold.
So I think to my mom, and I think it would have been challenging. My dad, for sure, it would have been really hard. My dad and I had a hard time at the end of his life just because of my waning political progressiveness and his doubling down with that. It really,
that dynamic.
It was really challenging. And unfortunately it was, that was hard. I think back to my mom and I wish so badly that my mom could have known the church wasn't true earlier in her life. I think it would have helped her so much. I really think that the shame and the guilt and all of those things, the perfectionism that she was prone to, and she could never live up to it in the church. I actually really think that played into her. She got Alzheimer's fairly young. And I think that all played into the stress that played into that. And so I think that I wish I could go back and have known this and talked to her back then.
Yeah.
I don't want to minimize at all your courage, but it's noteworthy. So many people, we learned from the Marlon Jensen, Greg Prince, Travis Stratford faith crisis study that we did of 3,000 Mormons, ex-Mormons, people who had lost their faith that we did for the church, that so many of those who lost their faith in the church weren't the weak ones, weren't the Jack Mormons. They weren't the ones who believed too little. They were the ones who believed the strongest. They're the APs on the mission. They're the bishops and stake presidents and even area authorities. And it was their intense level of belief that led to their very strong disillusionment. But so in many ways, it's the best and brightest. But it's very, very common for the people that I talk to who have lost their faith to have felt at some point, whether male or a man or woman, to have identified with Nephi and to have played the role in the family of the righteous one or the noble and great one or the valiant one, and to see themselves that way. And in no way to diminish your courage, Jeff, but I talk to a lot of people who, often men, but many times women, who lose their faith in Mormonism, but because their parents are still alive, they don't feel like they can make the same decisions you have because they don't want to disappoint their parents who are still alive, or they don't want to kill their parents who are still alive, or they just don't want to fall from grace and to see their status as a valiant son or daughter be diminished in the eyes of their parents. And so I wonder if your parents having passed away is almost a privilege that maybe allowed you to deconstruct faster than it otherwise might. And even in your case, Larissa, your dad's out.
Yeah.
So at least so many women that I've done retreats with, it's like, if I do this, my dad, I'm not going to be daddy's valiant little girl anymore.
Yeah.
You didn't, and I'm not trying to diminish your courage, but you didn't have to deal with disappointing dad.
We've had this conversation that I think because we have this high level of separation from, I mean, like we love our families, but we moved away early. We've always lived out of state. And so I think that, you know, going through the medical school, his medical school thing together, I think that kind of created a high level of independence for us as a family unit. But I do think that it's so much easier because me and my mom, we don't have a, you know, like you know that it was kind of troubled when I was younger. So my mom and I don't have a super close relationship. So I told her, and I know she didn't like it, and we probably won't talk about it ever again, you know. So it's not, you know, that's not a thing. And I hear other people, I mean, going through this without your spouse, I think would be absolutely just so difficult. And then if we were in different family situations, yes, I think it would be so much harder. So I do think that this is a level of privilege that we have because we already kind of had this separation from our family. Your parents are gone. Jeff's parents were so proud of him and so happy. And when Jeff was first called to the bishopric, like your parents came out to visit us, and his mom was like, I just can't wait to see Jeff sitting on the stand. Like it was so important for her. And I know that that's problematic, but it was so important for her to like see her son in leadership in the church. And so I think that it might be even more difficult than we realize. Because looking back, but I agree with what you said. I feel like it would be so nice to be like, Mom, it's not true. Like you can let go of it. Like all the ways that it's hurting you, like you can let go of it. But I do think that we are exercising a fairly high level of privilege. And we have a lot of siblings that have left, and we felt like we became closer to them after that. And so we're definitely not in the same family situation that many other people are dealing with.
For sure.
And again, please don't take that as me diminishing your
I don't
courage.
No.
Yeah.
Or work, because it's been brutal, right?
Yeah. I think it's important to acknowledge though that like it's not the same for everybody, and some people have a really, really difficult path out of the church.
Yeah.
So that's kind of actually relationships tower that we kind of moved into. How about marriage? So some things that commonly can show up as loss is kind of what you were talking about, this sense of like, would I have made this decision if we weren't, you know, both members? If I were, or
would we have ever gotten married, right?
Yeah.
Or a woman kind of works on her identity tower and becomes really empowered, and it now creates a new dynamic in marriage, right? Where the woman now is like, actually, I'm not okay with that, or really kind of using her voice in a new way, or intimacy changes. And so did you feel a sense of loss, and this is a loss question, we can do the rebuilding kind of later, but a loss in the marriage with regard to deconstructing?
Absolutely. And on multiple levels, I think recognizing our family structure and the dynamic that we had created over 20 years, and that's been challenging and continues to be very challenging to change, because we're in patterns and ruts of this is the way that it works. And so we've really had to disrupt it, and it has not been easy and still is not easy. And I would say that's our biggest thing that we're battling through right now, I'd say. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And I would say, I don't know that I feel a sense of loss like within our relationship. I think that we've had to look at our marriage and really say like, would we have gotten married? You know, like the church kind of painted this picture for us. So, and I mean, we can't ever know that. There's so many factors to this, but I think it's good to look at and say like, would we have gotten married? Like if I had a different narrative, would I have wanted kids? You know, like these are all things that I think we've questioned, but I think since we went through this together, I don't think that I necessarily felt like there was loss in like what our relationship was, because we felt like we were leaving the church to help our relationship or to kind of preserve our relationship.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
And the sexuality, I mean, we talked about that, and I feel like that has been taking our relationship and opening it up and making it so Larissa and I mean, I there's nothing there that is hidden or that we don't know. And I feel like that has really helped us from just from a being with each other together and intimacy. I mean, all of it, I think, has been helpful. But breaking down the patriarchal structure that we just internalized and put has definitely been, to me, the most challenging thing in the Reconstruction, and something that's really taken a lot of and will continue, I'm sure, to take a lot of time.
Yeah. Okay, I just have a couple quick. The other one is parenting. Did you experience any loss? It can be around stability or, something that comes up oftentimes in loss and grief across the board is loss of choice, the sense of like what choice I would have made if I actually was aware that it should have been a choice, or it can be kind of this sense of, the beliefs that we may have had when we actually took on a role as parents. Have you experienced anything that way?
So I know that we decided, we kind of made our like final decision to leave. And we had gone out of town for my 40th birthday. And so we were out of town, and then that was kind of when we were like, no, we're doing it. Like, we're going to tell people we're doing it. We're done. So once we came home, I kind of had this it was almost like you come into your real life and you're like, whoa, like I said that we were going to go. So I kind of had this like backslide, but a lot of it was around parenting, because I started to feel like, well, what am I going to teach my kids? And like now there's no foundation and my kids are going to go off the rails. And so I definitely felt like there was a loss of like a program for the kids. Because, like there's a very distinct program of like, do these things, look this way, act this way, go to BYU, like get married at this or do a mission.
Structure.
So the structure of parenting. And I had a really like a few days where I was just like sick about it. And I think it was almost like the realization that like we can go away for the weekend for my birthday and be feeling this, but then you come back to your real life and you're like, oh, now I have to actually put this into play and I'm with my kids again. So I really felt like there was a loss of structure or of a program. And that was really hard for me for a little bit.
And I think knowing what your parenting style is, because in the church, again, you have this hierarchy, and you have, at least for us, it was very, I think, authoritative, and now you're saying, okay, well, how are we going to parent now? And that's another thing that I think we're still figuring out, because you think, okay, we'll do it this way, but then our kids do something, and it's really easy to click back over into how we used to parent.
That's true.
And so I think that's been challenging. And I actually brought this up a couple weeks ago and said, I think it would be good for us to read. I think it's a book you had recommended, actually, about parenting, so we can feel like at least we're on the same page and we have a philosophy, so we can help check each other, because that's challenging. It's been challenging.
Yeah.
Yes, I so hear that. Yeah. How about the existential tower? For many people, this idea, sometimes the impact just comes of itself, the afterlife, or questions of the universe, and sometimes it actually comes up around death. Either that you experienced of someone you really love in the past that then you kind of have to look at, where you're like, oh, well, when my mom passed, I really thought I was going to see her again, or, whatever, and having to kind of update, or a death after. Did you feel like that tower was in any way kind of where you felt this sense of loss or reckoning?
I know that I did. That was a big thing for me. It's funny, when I was in the church, I used to get really, I don't know if it's just my type of brain, but I used to get really, really stressed out and upset about when I thought about living forever. Like that makes me feel very anxious. Like, what am I going to do all that time? Like, what does it feel like to live forever? Like, and am I going to be exhausted? Is there like no break? So I don't know. It just kind of was like really hard for my brain to get around. But then on the other side, thinking of death with this type of finality was also like very upsetting for me. And so, yeah, I feel like I was definitely, that was something that was really hard for me, was having this kind of existential, like, what does this mean? And even right now, I still feel like I kind of will get freaked out and scared and think like, what if something happened to Jeff? Cause I always thought like, well, we'll be together forever, so it's okay. And now like learning how to sit with this idea that like, I don't know, like we may not know. And there's good that comes with that, but I think for me, that was a really hard thing. And I don't know, it seems like that was less of a thing for you. Maybe you were more pragmatic about it, but.
Well, it is hard to think about because you think you have all the answers and the answers make you feel nice, but it doesn't mean those answers are true, right? So I feel like that's been something that I've been able to wrap my hands around and just say, I can be okay with not knowing. And I live my life. We take advantage of the time that we're here and the time we're together, and we try and do good things and treat people good. And then if there's an afterlife, great. If there's not, then I won't know that anyway. So no reason for me to be stressing out about it because there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
And then people say, well, what if it's true? Then what are you going to do? I'm like, if it's true and I get up there and God says, you know what? The Mormon church was true. I'm going to be like, well, that was a sneaky little thing you pulled on us. No, I have absolutely no concerns of that. Even though I thought, I actually remember saying this to you, is like, how could we live our life out of the church not knowing that, not knowing for sure? That didn't take long to like
to
break that down.
Yeah. I think it's so important to kind of take a moment, because I do think when people are oftentimes navigating faith transition or faith crisis or however you choose to define it for yourself, there's this sense of like, it feeling so incredibly overwhelming. And I like the towers because it shows you, how, that it's not just religion. It's not just when we're talking about faith. It's that within Mormonism, it touches everything. It's a lens that sort of touches everything. And that's why it can feel so intense and so destabilizing.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's really insightful,
Yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, we've already been talking about the Reconstruction elements after the deconstruction some, but I guess one way to really kind of like end on the most powerful and constructive and positive note is just to talk about general joy and happiness and fulfillment now. Because, the church, there's this idea of learned helplessness where the church teaches you, where will you go? If it's not this, then you have nothing. There is no happy. You can't be a good parent. You're going to cheat on your spouse. You're going to be a miserable human being. There's no joy and happiness after leaving Mormonism. Where will you go? Stay on the boat.
Yeah.
And that's what I think Marty Seligman calls learned helplessness, where like you shock a dog in a circle to the point where you can take the electricity wires off and the dog stays in the circle because they've learned to stay in the circle. So one way to just kind of direct the climax or the end of this amazing 3-part series is to talk about the contrast to the church's assertion that wickedness never was happiness. So you two are officially wicked by Mormon church standards. There's nothing more wicked than having the truth and then abandoning it. I think that's sons of perdition are the people that once had the light and then lost it. So you are a son and daughter of perdition by Mormon church standards, and you should be miserable and loathing and wallowing in wickedness. But to be serious, are you happy now? Are you healthier now? Obviously, Buddhism teaches us that there's always suffering in life and there's no way to escape suffering. We all know that there are plenty of Orthodox Mormons that are suffering terribly. So that's all. We know that's not the way. But in what ways are you healthier and happier now? And in what ways are you maybe worse off or not as happy and healthy? Let's go there.
So I'm going to use our son as a way to kind of like illustrate this, because we haven't talked about our son yet. So, but this will be a good illustration on kind of like what we found outside of Mormonism. So our oldest son was 14 when we left and had just turned 15 at this time. So we had been out of the church about 6 months. And we had actually always suspected since he was very young that he might be gay. And so we had kind of geared up and prepped for this. But he came out to us 6 months after we left the church. And I think that we did pretty good with his coming out because we had kind of prepared for it. But so he told us, and we just said, like, thank you for telling us and sharing more of who you are with us. And he said, I'm going to tell you something, and then I don't want to talk about it at all. So we just said, like, thank you for letting us in. We want to know you and who you are. And like, we're so proud of you for, like sharing that and being open, and we love you. And then we left his room. But then that night we were talking, and it kind of like, it's funny because this is one of these ways that the Mormon conditioning starts coming through. Because in my mind, I start thinking like, okay, what does this mean? Like, what do we got to do? And I really came to the place where I was like, nothing. Like, it's just that this is just who he is. Like, there's nothing we need to really like do or like gear him. I mean, obviously there are things that we need to do to help support him and make sure that he has what he needs. But I think that this turned out to be a really beautiful family moment for us because I felt like I could just love him and say, thank you for letting me know you more. And there wasn't any like, oh no, how is this going to affect him if he goes on a mission? And is he going to be accepted at BYU? And then what does this mean for him in the church? It just took all of those things away.
And what will the members think? Oh
and
my gosh, I was relief society president.
Yeah, can I be someone who has a gay son? Yeah, like, can I be that person? And what does that mean? And does that mean that I wasn't a good, strong member of the church because my son was gay? Or, so I think that we had this really nice experience with him coming out because that was taken away. Some of those expectations were taken away. And so we could just kind of sit and just be like, this is who you are. And I think that that's really kind of defined like the change in our relationship with our kids is that we don't have to expect them to look a certain way or be a certain way. We just need to teach them to be healthy, happy, connected individuals.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, I feel like I'm much healthier. I feel like our relationship is much healthier. I feel like I'm a better parent. I feel like I'm a less judgmental person in general. I feel like I connect better with my people I work with my patients. And I know people can say that's ridiculous. That does that. But I really think pulling down these barriers makes a big difference. It really does. And I feel like I'm more open to my own flaws and imperfections and recognizing those and trying to realize what was the church's conditioning and how can I break free of that and try and be a better person and a better partner and so all of those things I feel like, yes, that it's been a positive.
Can I give you each a moment to just sort of celebrate yourselves and just share, if you can, some small victories that mean something to you in rebuilding? There are oftentimes, during rebuilding, we're oftentimes reframing or reclaiming or, growing in new ways or healing, from, are there any things that kind of stick out individually or in partnership, victories along the way of rebuilding?
So we talked a little bit about this yesterday. About maybe I'll just tell this story really quick about my son. My son who came out as gay a little while ago. He told me he wanted to get his ears pierced, and so Mormon Larissa that is still inside of me was trying to come out and say like, no, you're not getting your ears pierced. I don't like that. And like, we got to look clean cut and, there's a certain way. So I kind of recognized this while he was telling me this, and my daughter has her ears pierced. And so I'm also aware, like, I can't do a gender double standard and say, like, she can have her ears pierced, but you can't.
Yeah, immediately my mind went to like, well, he's too young. You got to wait till he's 18. And then I'm like, oh, wait a minute. We pierced the ears of like 7-year-olds.
Right. Yeah. So my daughter actually has her, my daughter, my sweet black daughter has alopecia. And so she is actually bald right now. And so I let her do multiple piercings on her ears because I want her to have ways to express herself and show individuality. And she can't do that with her hair right now. So, anyway, so yeah, I feel like I recognize this as Mormon Larissa was trying to come out. And so instead of fighting it, I was kind of like, okay, like we're going to do this. And so I feel like I have been trying to be aware of when my conditioning is coming out and kind of keeping it at bay. And so I do feel like, those experiences, especially with parenting, I feel like those are small victories for me because I am being aware, why am I reacting this way? You know, why am I so uncomfortable with this? And is there a reason I am afraid of this? Or is this just the conditioning that I've had? So I do feel like there's some small victories there.
Would you mind sharing the, I'm sorry, but the victory, because I feel like this is a victory, if you don't mind sharing about the thoughts you had around school and cost. And I feel like that's a victory.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after post breast cancer, I was like, I'm going back to school. And I had heard, about the BYU Pathways program, which is through BYU Idaho. And so I thought I'll do that because it's cheap. And Jeff, we went into substantial amount of debt for Jeff's medical school, but I was like, whatever, like I'm just going back to school and it's not super important. I'm just doing it for me. And so I had kind of like devalued my own education. And so I was like, yeah, I'll just do this through BYU Pathways. So of course this was before our full deconstruction. Because obviously once we left, it would have been problematic to get through an ecclesiastical interview. Right. But so that was how I first started. And then as we kind of so I had applied to the program and I was like, yeah, I'll do this. And I actually had this experience with our therapist when I was talking to him about it. And he said, he goes, what is your wildest fantasy of what you would do for a job? And I was kind of like, I don't know. And this is a sad thing because I think as a woman in the church, you're not even taught to look at that. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, I don't even know what my fantasy, what's my wildest fantasy of what I want to be when I grow up. And so he said, whatever you think about, that's what you should do. And so when I approached my schooling, though, I was kind of like, oh, I'll do a cheap option. And they have these ones, but I'll do something like that. But as we were kind of getting further along with my faith deconstruction, I really thought to myself, you know what, my dream is to do women's studies. I want to study gender and women and what's their story and what has shaped, and how hierarchy shapes relationships. I want to understand these systems and I want to understand what women of color. I want to understand trans women. I want to understand all of these pieces to these are just things that I'm very passionate about. And so, kind of at the end of the summer, kind of at the last minute before I would have started with BYU Pathways, I was like, no, I'm going to pull out of this program. And so I looked for women's studies programs and there wasn't a good option right around me. And so I was like, I'm going to find an online program. So I found one with the University of Massachusetts. They had developed a really good program and they made it so that it can be fully done online. But it was more expensive, and I really had to say no, my education is worth it. Our family I can use family resources for my education, and so I'm in school full time right now, and I made that change, and it's been so great. I'm so passionate about the things that I'm learning. It's so me, and so yeah, that is a victory. But Margie and I talked about this yesterday, where I said, no, I'm worth it. I'm worth family resources being put toward my education. This matters for us.
Love it.
That's it.
I love it. So you're pursuing women's studies and getting that degree and following. What's that?
Women and gender.
Yeah, women and gender studies. Yeah, I graduate in May, so I'll be done with that. So
in May, that's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good for you.
And she's killing it.
It's really
Lots
hard.
of stress, but she's got a 4.0.
It's hard to be a full-time student and to have 3 kids.
I can imagine.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky at this phase of my life, but I'm doing the thing. So
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Good for you.
yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. What's it like to be following a passion that you choose?
Oh yeah, it does. It feels amazing. It feels like it's good and authentic to me. And so yeah, I think this is a good thing for me to learn to take up space and to do my thing and pursue it. And I think it's healthy as we're trying to rebuild in our marriage for Jeff to say like, no, I'll support you. Like I'm going to make this happen for you. And we've kind of tried to restructure our life a little bit. So like, Jeff is more involved with, like we're having a more, equal partnership in caring for the kids. Yeah.
Like redefining.
Yes.
Divided.
Yep.
Yeah. That's been a huge
roles
part. And
chores.
that has been rocky, but, and it's an ongoing process, but that's kind of where we are right now, is trying to identify where there's problematic areas and where we want to like rebuild and make things better. And I feel like my schooling is a big part of that, because I think that it requires kind of you and the kids to say like, we need to support mom right now, and we're going to like be here for her. So
Yeah. Yep.
So I want to do a quick lightning round, and some of this is going to be a repeat, but I'm going to name a bunch of different domains and have you each do a brief summary of now versus before. Is that okay?
Yeah.
As a way to kind of encapsulate Reconstruction.
Okay.
Okay. So here we go. Mental health. After losing your faith in the Mormon Church and leaving the Mormon Church, how is both of your respective mental health?
I remember the week after we left, Larissa looked at me and she goes, I think I cured my anxiety. So I would say, yes, I think our mental health.
Which my anxiety didn't fully go away. I went through a little honeymoon period where I was like, I just felt so
Liberation
liberated.
is mine.
Yeah. And then after that, then leaving the church doesn't cure anxiety, but I do feel like, because I'm living kind of in a more authentic way, and because we're prioritizing both of our needs and being better partners, I think that that's been my mental health has greatly improved.
And I think just from what we talked about with the sexuality, I think that has been such a huge mental health boost for me to have that. So
your sexuality is healthier after leaving the church.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What about and again, the question isn't, have all your problems been solved leaving Mormonism? That's a red herring. It's just, have things gotten better? So your marriage dynamics.
Oh, absolutely better.
Yeah, it's better, but
it's a process.
But we are restructuring. So we like every now and again we're like, are we on a roller coaster in our marriage? Because sometimes we feel like things are like really good because we're kind of like understanding this and we're being really open. But then sometimes, like once you start identifying issues, it's easy to be like, hey, that's it. That's the thing that you said you wouldn't do anymore. And so we've gone through like some good times and
she's not talking about me.
The highs are high and the lows are low.
Yeah.
So, I feel like our marriage is on the way to being what the marriage that we want to be, want to have. And that has created some conflict.
And it
it has to be
20 years of a status quo that we did not disrupt, and that the church infused in us. We didn't choose it. We didn't talk about it. And so disrupting that is not easy.
Yeah.
I think we're finding that out, but we've made big strides in that.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you? Okay.
I was going to comment on that.
Okay. Yeah.
It sounds like that what you've done, a big shift you've made is kind of moving from an unconscious marriage to a conscious one.
Yes.
Absolutely,
And yes, there's always like that reckoning period of when you're aware to things that previously you didn't know.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. That's a
And
really
one
good way
thing
to
that
put
I
it.
have found that has been really challenging when you're trying to change the dynamic, because Larissa has done so much of the taking care of the kids, making sure the kids are where they need to go, making sure there's something to eat for dinner, and making sure the house is clean. And so disrupting that is really uncomfortable. And it even takes, like, for me, I'm like, no, we've got to make like a list, and I've got to have like these things, because it's just too hard for me to just do things that I've never done automatically. And it's helped us. I mean, I think those are small steps that we've done.
So just to give an example, we, women do so much, invisible work where we're actually anticipating needs, or we're planning things and managing. And so I feel like Jeff has always been like, he's always cooked, at our house, and he's always like cleaning and stuff. But one thing that I always say is I don't want a helper. I want someone who's like a partner with me that's actually like in it and, like really like got their brain around this. I don't need another helper. My kids are old enough, they can be helpers. And so, but we've had to put certain things in place. Like I'm usually the one that kind of is eyeing like what the kids need for school, and like, do we have gifts for the teachers, and, like who has a test, and is it hat day at school today? And so, it was just hard to bring Jeff into that, because he's just not in the mode. And those are things that can be very overwhelming when you have 5,000 of
like
those
cumulative,
things.
yes.
It's so much. And so like this school year, Jeff was like, I'm just going to manage everything of Golden School. And so I was kind of like, are you ready to that? Because he needs like Valentine's cards on Valentine's Day, and I always give the teachers a gift at Christmas, and like he has to wear his school shirt on the field trip day. Like these are all the like things.
Details, yeah.
But I think it's real. But Jeff was like, no, I think if I just know like this is my responsibility. So these are the things that we're kind of trying out, so that Jeff can kind of start getting in the mindset of like anticipating these things, and managing them kind of the way that I have approached them in the past.
Yes. You guys are testing out.
We're trying.
You're moving into, that's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It really
Yeah, it
is.
is.
Uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so I was going to say parenting, and you kind of talked about it with your son coming out, but overall, do you feel like you're healthier parents?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I feel like now I feel like we kind of have this focus on like connection instead of our kids doing specific things. We have a focus on like, I want you to feel connected and loved, and I want to teach you to be a healthy individual. So that's good. But it is, I mean, again, this is still a struggle, because we're trying to work through our conditioning, and parenting is just really hard. But we feel like there's been a marked improvement in how we relate to our kids. And I think our kids have enjoyed watching us like go through this, because we're doing things for the first time, and like we have to sit them down and tell them like, hey, that thing we told you, we found out it's not true, we were wrong. And so and then our kids they weren't with us, but like we were like, hey guys, we're gonna drink, like we're gonna start drinking. So our kids are kind of like watching us have experiences for the first time, and they're like really judgmental of us. They're like, are you getting drunk? And I'm like, no, like it takes work to get drunk. Like I'm just having like one drink. So it's kind of funny, like to have your kids be on this with you, where they're kind of like watching you figure things out. And so I think it's nice though, because they know that we're not perfect and we're just figuring out.
And leveled that playing field you were talking about, which is really,
even with the kids.
I feel like it has made our relationships funner. And I mean, they'll test out swearing in front of us to see what the reaction. And at first we're like, wait, you can't say that, like. But yeah, so it's really been an interesting thing to go through.
Yeah, our kids are testing us. I feel like they're trying to see like, are you really going to let go of Mormon mom and dad, or are you not? Because I feel like they're testing us, but it's good.
Okay, what about, so you talk about, let's just say alcohol or swearing or sexuality. One of the values that religion can provide is providing these moral or morality guardrails to keep you from falling off a cliff, keep you from becoming an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Or a libertine or whatever.
Yeah.
How do you feel you're both doing in terms of moral self-restraint?
I think we're kind of are taking these individually, like what, just looking at and saying like, what is this us, or do we think that this will be good for us? Is this something that we want to get into? And
we had a talk before we ever drank alcohol. And I think the thing that was so interesting to me, the idea of drinking and what it was all about and what it actually is, was so less overwhelming. I mean, you think you take a drink and you're drunk, and it's so much different than that. And also, I think that Larissa and I are both in a place where I don't feel like we're needing alcohol to treat something.
Yeah.
I feel like we're using alcohol to eat with a meal, or when we get together with some friends, and those are always things though that I think are certain especially for people who have never had those things, I think they become dangerous. But yeah, I feel like that has. I feel like we're in a healthy place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had a weird thing with, so when we first left, I kind of like had this realization like, oh no, is Jeff going to want to drink? Because I know that his grandparents were alcoholics and it really affected his mom. And so I brought it up and I was like, hey, I'm just going to be honest. I'm actually like really worried about you drinking. Are we going to drink? And so, we just talked about it and it was kind of the same thing as our approach to like sexual health. It was like, well, let's just get an agreement about it. Like, let's do this in a way that's healthy. But I was also talking to a therapist friend of mine and she said, I was like, yeah, I'm kind of worried. Like, is Jeff going to become an alcoholic? Because his grandparents were. And she said, people who become alcoholics are using alcohol to deal with unresolved trauma. So she was like, if Jeff has unresolved trauma, and I was like, no, I feel like we're dealing with all of our trauma right now. And so she was like, no, I think that you're probably in a good place to have a healthy approach to this. But it did scare me at first though. Cause yeah, you don't know. And it's like, oh no, are we going to drink? And then now we're alcoholics. So,
and I don't ever feel like, I mean, we'll drink, I'd say occasionally, but I don't feel this pull that it's like this fascinating thing that I think we make it out, or coffee, the same thing. You know, I think sometimes you make these things bigger than they need to be when you actually do them. You're like, oh, that's what it was.
Yeah.
That's what all the fuss was about.
I do think you have to be kind of careful because I know that people can leave the church and kind of go hard because they felt like they have been restricted. So I do think it's something that you have to watch in yourself to say like, am I self-soothing or am I, can I take this on in a healthy way?
Yeah. Okay. What about spirituality? So sometimes when you leave a high demand religion, you're allergic to that term altogether and you like that term repulses you. Other times you just develop new senses of meaning for what spirituality means. How do you both think about spirituality now?
So the way I kind of understand spirituality, it's maybe like understanding that you're a part of something that's bigger than you. And so in that way, I feel like I do feel like I am having a very spiritual experience because I'm learning how, I'm connecting with people and so I don't feel like I have lost spiritual experiences, but I definitely am not interested in religion. And so I feel like for me, I really embrace spirituality or this connection or feeling like there's something that's bigger than all of us that we're contributing to. For me, that's what spirituality is. And I feel connected with that. But I've made a full separation of spirituality and religion.
And I would say I agree with that. That to me, spirituality is about connecting with people. And I think there is a power in that. And that is what I look to do is making connections, making relationships. That's what feeds me. Along with, I think, being outside. We've been hiking on Sundays, which I think has been really nice. It's been
one of the most healing things. After the Sundays that we've had the last 20 years, we go hiking and then we'll like go to brunch together, and it almost feels like euphoric because it's so healing and so different than what our Sabbath day used to be like. And so
we've had some long deconstruction talks on our hikes.
We hashed some things out.
So it's been nice.
Okay. It's beautiful. You talked about death and existential stuff, so we won't revisit that. What about friendships and community? Many people miss their wards, they miss their community, they lose their friends. Have you all been able to plug the holes of friendship and community, and if so, how?
So I think this is a little different for us because we don't live in Utah. And so we've asked the question, like, would Jeff's practice have been affected if he was practicing in Utah? Like, would there have been people that are like, oh, he left the church, I don't feel like he's very trustworthy anymore. But because we live outside of Utah, it kind of affects us differently. So Jeff has his practice and he's got his patients and he has this group of friends that he rides bikes with, and only like one or two of them are LDS. And actually one of our ex-Mormon friends rides with him. So, like I feel like those pieces of community are still intact. We do miss people in our ward. Like we did love people in our ward. So I feel like that is something that we miss on some level. But for me personally, I feel like I'm very like engaged with my schoolwork, and I started volunteering with, so I'm an animal person and I really love dogs. So I started volunteering with like a service dog training program. And so I'm like making friends with that. And so I don't feel at this point that we have a loss of like that we had a big loss of community, even though we do miss some people that are from our ward.
Yeah.
Would you say that that's a good assessment?
My cycling group's an important group for me, and mostly non-members there. So to them, actually, it's funny when one of them found out I had left the church, who had never spoken to me about the church, but he called and told me how glad he was that I left the cult. But then he started inviting me to go to his church.
To go to his cult.
And then, trying
You
to
said cults in air quotes.
trying to
Right?
and to invite me to go to this retreat. And this is like a pretty dang
like
conservative Baptist church in Middle Tennessee.
Yeah.
So
it was kind of funny because it's like, why are you calling Mormonism a cult? Like you're in a whole, like you're in your own church that has their own thing. So yeah, it was kind of funny, but.
So, but yeah, we've been invited to a lot of churches, but we are not I think, interested in the
we're
church.
not feeling the church.
Certainly spirituality.
I have a friend I met with just this week who ended up getting divorced from his spouse and felt completely, former bishop, felt completely isolated, completely alone, suicidal, and he took up pickleball.
Oh.
And he found pickleball communities in Park City, in Salt Lake, in St. George, in Vegas. And he's made this amazing group of friends who now invite him out to get a beer or invite him out to dinner. And, it hasn't solved all the problems, but just a pickleball community. Yeah. I think he would say pickleball's transformed his life, saved his life.
Yeah.
And it was really inspiring to see that you absolutely can form community, and sometimes even more genuine and authentic community than you ever had in Mormonism.
Yeah. And we also, we feel like we've had a really good experience in the ex-Mormon community. I know that there can be, you can leave the church and be a terrible ex-Mormon, but what we found is generally we have a shared experience. A lot of times we have the same values, similar things that led us out of the church. And so we've kind of connected, like we use Twitter, but we've connected online with people. We're in several, ex-Mormon Facebook groups. I'm in a few like women's groups. There's actually an ex-Mormon group that's just women of color. And it's so nice to just like talk about our experiences, or for people to post things and say like, can you believe this? This makes me so mad. And so it's just like really nice to find people. And we have a small group of ex-Mormons that are just from our stake. And so it's a couple that he was in a bishopric with Jeff, and then a couple that left the same time as us that were from our ward, and then just another couple. So we all get together and we have a dinner group, and it's honestly been amazing. And it's actually really funny because we all knew each other as Mormons, and now we're not. And the first time we went out with one of these couples, we went out to dinner and we were drinking, and the guy, he was like, this was not on my 2021 bingo card to be like drinking with the Kindreds, because we had only ever known them like they were in the bishopric together, and it's like now we're sitting at dinner like drinking together. And so it's such a funny experience that we kind of laugh about like who we were, or we can say like, hey, remember that one time when we all were doing this, and now we're on the other side. So that group has been very, very important to us as well. So these are kind of ways that we've like kind of tried to build community after leaving the church.
I love it. And that's so crucial. We're just,
I think so.
We're tribal animals, and we thrive in tribes.
Yeah.
That's why we've talked about find your pod, find your book club, find a small group of friends that you can do life with together.
Yes.
Absolutely.
That become family of choice instead of family of blood. If for some reason family of blood can't meet all your needs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Margie.
I was curious about, what healing kind of looks like for you right now, and less about, let me just say, I'm not talking about healing in an optimization way, like fixing yourself or being healed, where it's like destination oriented or perfectionistic, more like healing, like showing up for yourself. What does that look like right now for you both? And that can be individually and together.
That's a good question. I think for me, like obviously I've been on this journey where I have kind of like allowed myself to orbit around other people. And so I think that me trying to be really conscious of, like what my individuality or trying to differentiate myself, I think I'm trying to be very conscious of that. So I think that's maybe a big part of healing for me, is just to try to, be a stronger, more developed person on my own and not feel like I'm so dependent on other people for their validation. And so I think that's kind of like a big thing for me right now.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I don't know what I would say. I mean, I've certainly been doing a lot of reading, the time that normally would be gospel study that now is reading books. And that's been, I think, very helpful for me. And I feel like it's opened up a lot of new perspectives and different types of books, not just one type of book. And so I think that's been very helpful. Also, trying to, I think my own physical health and taking time to optimize that too has been a big part of that too, I guess.
And what are the ways that you do that?
So I love to cycle. Larissa and I really enjoy, we go to Orange Theory, which is the gym. I think you have them around here too, a gym. So we'll go there together, which has been a nice way for us to work out together. And then trying to make something, on a daily basis from that direction. And then also I follow, people who are big into preventative health as opposed to not just taking care of problems when they come. So that's been a more recent thing that I've been getting into, is saying, not waiting until a problem shows up. So trying to be proactive about it. And I've always tried to be that type of a physician, but I think even more in my own life and to try and take part in that.
I love that. Bringing it back to yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it gets hard to do sometimes as a physician.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, beautiful. Well, before we end this amazing, epic, instructive, enlightening, inspiring.
No one got to this point, by the way.
Oh, that's not true.
It's way too long.
I know people who listen every hour of Mormon Stories. Not like at night. For many of my listeners and viewers, 9 hours is nothing.
I've listened to some pretty long ones.
Yeah. What final stories or comments do you all want to make before we wrap up? Or do you feel like you've already shared everything you wanted to share?
I think we covered it. We really
Thanks to you both. I mean,
this has been a great experience for us.
When I came, it's surreal I feel like I know you both because of the podcast, and it's been so helpful in our process, and I really mean that. I mean, when you're reeling like that, to have a place where you can go and find someone who's understanding, even though I don't know you both, but it was very, very helpful. I remember early on going through the course, the faith deconstruction course you did with Natasha Helfer.
Gift of the Mormon Faith Crisis.
Gift of the Mormon Faith Crisis.
Yeah, we did that.
We'll include a link to that.
And that was very helpful. I just think that it was so nice to the space you feel is needed, and we really appreciate it. And I know that comes with a lot of downsides too, but very appreciated.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And thank you for trusting us with your story.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Any final thing, Larissa?
No, I think that we really got a lot out. So there was a lot, but we got it out. So no, I'm feeling good. I hope this is helpful for other people. We love the ex-Mormon community, and we hope that this adds something. And
And I hope it's helpful to the Mormon community too. I think, especially with, I think I feel so strongly about the sexuality stuff, and I think it's something that members need to take inventory of and reckon with.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you both for your courage and your wisdom, and for flying here, and for your time. I know you're going to help a lot of people.
Yeah.
So just thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And Margie, thank you so much for joining us throughout this series. I love having you as co-host.
Thank you. My pleasure.
You're a doll.
I'm a doll.
You're a treasure. And thanks to all of you who donate and make Mormon Stories and the Yoba Stories Foundation possible. We couldn't do it without your support. If you want to become a monthly donor, please go to mormonstories.org, click on the donate button, and become a monthly donor. And we'll keep doing this for as long as we can. Email us at mormonstories@gmail.com with your feedback. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, because those subscriptions mean the world. Be kind to each other. Be good to each other. And stay in touch. And we'll see you all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care.